And what's our delay? Are we streaming now?
It just needs a second to do it, to prepare. We should be streaming now.
All right. So let's see. I see Garris, I see Rachel, I see me.
Josie's here too.
And Josie's. All right, great. So we'll call to order at 4 o'clock. On this lovely, balmy October day. Okay. All right. So today is sort of, for everyone listening in, today's sort of interesting meeting. We don't have any formal business to take up, which normally we would break this meeting into a sort of 4 to 5 block, and then again at 5. So we are going to just kind of carry through. We will leave time for additional comments if there's interest at 5, but that's why the schedule might look a little bit different today if you all have been attending recently. So we'll start out with an opportunity for citizens to be heard. As I mentioned, we'll also try around 5 p.m. to break and see if anybody else has any additional comments. Now, I realize that we've received some letters for these discussion items. I would like, if anyone has comments on any discussion items, to please make them during the citizens to be heard period, as opposed to during the discussion times. This is not a public hearing. There's no notification out to the public, and I just think it's a more appropriate way to manage public input to make sure everyone has a chance to speak, but also that when we do invite broader participation for any items we take on, we have a chance to notice that effectively. So if you are here and you would like to make a comment as a citizen to be heard, if you wouldn't mind posting your comments in the chat, and we will try and keep those comments to about 3 minutes, please, just so that we all have a chance for anyone to be heard who wants to. So if you'd like to make a chat or make a comment, just in chat, just say, I'm here to make a comment. Otherwise, we'll move forward. All right, Mark Horowitz.
Wait.
Oh, Jaylyn.
I expected a lot of people to be making comments, but I did receive an email that I forwarded on to the Planning Commission about an hour or so ago. And I'm hoping everyone got that. If they haven't had a chance to read it, I would like to read it into the record on behalf of a citizen.
I got it. I read it.
Yep, I saw it as well. So let's do this, Jaylyn. Let's start in the order that people were popping in, and then we'll have you read into the record if it makes sense if that person doesn't show up. Does that sound good?
Perfect, yes.
All right, so Mark Horowitz, I see you first. I am going to ask to please keep comments somewhere around the 3 to 4 minute window. If it starts to go really long, I might interject. Thank you.
No, it won't go longer than hopefully even a minute. You know, I can see what's happening here, and I must say, perhaps I've been a little overly worked up for the last year or two, waiting for this to come up. The standards that I here see, if I understand it, unless I'm being naive, are certainly not onerous. And I just wanted to say a couple of things, except the annual inspections and associated fees. That kind of throws a little fear into me. I just want to say that if that's going to apply to bed and breakfast, it really ought to apply to all those overnight rentals down. I don't mean to pick on Rim Village, but all that type of rental, this should apply to all of them as well. I just want to say, I inspect my own house, and I keep in tip-top shape at all times. That's why, that's because I'm a bed and breakfast owner. I just want to say, perhaps we could address a higher standard for noise in neighborhood B&Bs. I like the idea of a sunset to sunrise sound curfew. Lastly, you know, without muddying the waters, I want to say I don't agree with the 500-foot rule. I don't feel like what's going on at my house should affect my neighbor's rights. And in fact, you know, not to muddy the waters, I would like to see any citizen be able to start a bed and breakfast with one room and work up from there. That would be a way to avoid the massive 5-room bed and breakfast syndrome. That's really all I got to say. The only thing that occurs to me is annual inspections and associated fees. Please, You better say something in a hurry, Terry. Say it.
Yeah, I think every 5 years would be just fine, you know, an initial inspection. And then every year seems excessive.
A bit
to me.
onerous. Otherwise, you're doing a good job. Thanks for making the overlays. Looking forward to other citizens' comments. Thanks for everything. Yahoo.
Thank you very much. And I do just want to clarify before we move on that the items in the packet represent standards from discussion back in 2017 as a baseline for us to begin to have discussions. This came out of the meeting from 2 weeks ago, where the interest from the Planning Commission to continue to have discussion about whether or not to take this up more formally started with, well, let's see where we left things off in 2017 and start from there. So I noticed in some of the letters, there was comments to these standards. If we decide to move forward on this and decide to take up these standards as a bottom line place to start, there will be ample opportunity to weigh in on the merits of the standards themselves, but these are not representative of any discussion that this current body has had. And in fact, many people on the commission now were not part of the drafting of those standards. So just want to make sure that's clear to everybody here to make comments. And if there's any confusion about that, we can certainly clarify. So the purpose of the conversation today is continuing the conversation from 2 weeks ago about whether and how and to what extent to move forward with this conversation more formally, going into future meetings and so on. So, all right, enough of me speaking. Let's see, Andre, I see you are next to make a comment.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Well, my name is Vic, and this is Anna, my wife. Andre's our son. We're using his computer, so hello, everybody. So I sent a letter to a bunch of people, and I don't know who got to read that letter. That was about us running a bed and breakfast for 14 years and being inspected and all that stuff. We're all cool with that. What we're concerned about is the fact that we are law-abiding, where we went ahead with all the taxation, all the loops, all the things to just run a real business and not just a nightly rental. And I have a few friends in town that, have looked at what we do and tried to do what we do and realized it was too difficult to do it properly the way that we did it. So some of them went ahead and rented their own room to people. They did it through Facebook. They did it through Airbnb and other things. We never got involved with what they were doing because we did the right thing from the beginning. And we're going to keep doing it because we're not afraid of what we're doing. We're doing it in plain sight. We have a sign in front of our driveway that says Desert Hills Bed and Breakfast. We pay our taxes. We pay payroll. We collect sales tax and property tax. And no, we don't collect property tax, sales tax and transient tax. We release all those taxes and we do the things like every restaurant does it in town, every motel, hotel. And now we're being put at the same level of, of non-compliant, like other Airbnbs or nightly rentals or people that rent their own rooms in their house to people. They don't pay taxes. We are not happy with the fact that we are just getting put to the same level that they're at. After all we've done, we pay websites, we pay fees on TripAdvisor, we pay all of our stuff, and now we're getting told that our idea of retirement will not work because most likely we won't be able to sell this place
As a B&B.
as a B&B in 15 years from now. My idea was to run it until I'm 60 and then decide what I'm doing. And we're very unsecure about this right now at the moment. So that's what we're here for, and it kind of worries us. All these hotels, motels popping up everywhere. It seems like they aren't regulated, and the only people that are getting targeted right here, it's a handful of B&Bs, and we have no award in this. Well, actually, we have a little bit of award because we're talking about it right now. But, seems like this thing's without, us being informed. We were informed by Mark Horowitz. Thank you, Mark, for telling us, because we wouldn't have heard anything about this at all. We would have just been like, you lost your chance to sell the place as a B&B. So that's all we have to say. I sent my letter and I hope, you guys can read it and consider it. We don't have 401ks like most people do that work for big companies or hotels or motels. This is our retirement. And if you take it away from us, then I'm going to have to start working again when I'm 60. That's it. That's all we have for right now. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you very much for your comments. Jennifer Wenzel.
Hi, thank you so much. I also sent in an email just today, which I know was kind of late, so I'm not sure if you guys got it, and time to review it, because I know you guys are busy, but and I won't rehash my email because I know you have covered a lot of those points with the people before me and with what you've said to us so far. But I do want to point out, you know, we're young. We just started a family. I've got a 20-month-old little boy, and we use most of our home on one end for the guests. And so my ideal goal eventually, when I get more money saved, which is hard with COVID, is to build off on our side of the house and make a room for my son to have that's better than what we have currently going, and maybe enough room for another kid or two. I mean, that's kind of my goal. But if there's holdups on building and adding on to B&Bs, it's prohibiting me having a family in essence, and being able to maintain a presence at my business and not have to hire a manager to be there and find housing elsewhere, which we won't be able to afford. We don't run a big operation. Our neighbors didn't even know we had a bed and breakfast probably the first year and a half we were in business. We are very respectful. I agree with there being issues with noises, I believe, at other bed and breakfasts in town and managers not being on site. So I would hope that we could maybe direct the conversation more to how do we oversee this to make sure that the folks who are running them are doing what they're supposed to and not impacting negatively. You know, we tell our guests after 10 to be quiet. I think sunset's a little early, especially in the wintertime. I like to make noise too, but you know, 10 o'clock at night, everyone should be kind of low key and not being overrun and being respectful is really important. So I think my biggest argument that I would put forward and hope that we'd look at is how are we going to, I guess, babysit the people who aren't behaving so that a few bad eggs don't impact so many good people, because my neighborhood's got several bed and breakfasts. We've got Desert Hills up the street, we're in Old City Park. We've got George over at Red Moon. We've got Beds and Bagels. You know, there's, and I'm having a blank on Terry and Tiger Keogh's name there. But, you know, we all are close to each other. I would never want to inhabit or, you know, take up someone else's right to do business. I think we as a property owner, and especially in the county, we bought our properties with certain rights, and to change those really isn't fair partway through the game. And I don't know that there is discussion about ending new B&Bs or taking away our rights to sell, but I would be against both of those. I think bed and breakfast are really cool places to stay. So I really appreciate your time. I hope I wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. George Wheel doesn't currently have audio, but wants to make a comment. George, if you can hear, sorry?
I do now.
Oh, lovely. Hi, you're welcome to make a comment.
I came back until you're ready for me. So I'm George Weil and owner of Red Moon Lodge. My partner, Deanna. Been in business for 6 years. Bought the property. This is our 6th season, 6.5 years ago, and spent a year doing build out on the lower area and putting 4 bedrooms and bathrooms and a common area and a kitchen, excuse me, a breakfast area. Lots of stonework, retaining walls. We spent a fortune on landscaping, and we continue to take care of that. We have a beautiful place. You know, if you have any interest in what really happens at B&Bs, you might go to TripAdvisor and look at the reviews there. You know, Desert Hills is rated #2 B&B, and they have like 900 reviews, and probably over 90% of them are 5-star. People have an amazing time at B&Bs. My reviews are the same. We're #3 rated B&B in Moab on TripAdvisor, and you know, over 90% are 5-star. You get a different clientele at B&Bs. You know, I know there's some others that run their places differently, but you know, people have an amazing time here. We've got 6.5 acres. We've got a pond. We've got views. We've got fields. You know, I remember what else I wanted to say, but oh, in the 6 years that we've been open, one time if we had to go down and talk to a guest and say, be quiet, one time.
And they were inside.
And they were inside. So we don't get the rowdy people. We don't get the partiers. We don't get the razors. We get pretty mellow people that are looking for a quieter place to reside and get away from the noisy chaos in town. And the people are amazing, and we're really lucky to have them visit us. And we want to continue to be, we want to be legitimate. We don't want to be a bastard zoning, non-conforming. I bought this property and spent $200,000 doing the build out, landscaping, rock work to create beauty here, a tranquil place for people to come. I do have an issue. They're talking, I guess you're talking about limiting it to 10 guests. Well, we have 5 rooms. We have a couple of rooms, we have 2 beds. If a family wants to come and have 2 young kids, what are they going to do? Because if we're limited to 10 guests, then we can't put 4 people in a room. We can't put a mother and father and 2 children in a room. And it just doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make us that much more money, but anything that prohibits family coming and gathering, they wouldn't be able to be in 2 rooms, not leave their kids. So we want to continue to be available to families. And the whole idea of annual inspections, I mean, I really don't understand that. It's like, what's the big deal? What's happening with B&Bs that you really want to continue to come down on us? Are we getting complaints about us or any of the B&Bs? I don't really think so. Do the nightly rentals, do they have to have annual inspections? All these condos and who even monitors how many people go to those condos? I mean, that's party zone, I'm guessing. And that's not what happens out here. I mean, we want to continue to be able to have a little freedom and not have to continue to, we don't want the inspections. I don't see any point in those. I mean, if somebody explains to me why we need them or why the overnight rentals need them, and then the limit of 10 people, I mean, sometimes we have 12 people, sometimes we have 14 because that's, people want to, save a little money, share a little bit of space, maybe have their families here. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody's comments. I hope people really have an open mind about what B&Bs are about. They can be really amazing spaces. And, any questions, go to TripAdvisor, look at the reviews, see what people say about their stays at these B&Bs, because it can be, we're good for Moab. And thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Emily, can I just say something else?
Yes.
When I was reading over the restrictive covenants and it says in there that they can offer a room, a B&B can offer a room with 2 beds at 300 square feet. And then it sort of kind of goes against, it's contradictive to number 1, which says that they can't have more than 2 people. So
I'm so sorry. I just want to jump in that these were drafted by a past planning commission, and not everybody on the planning commission helped to draft these or even have familiarized themselves beyond them being in our packet today. I'm cutting you off only because I don't even know that every planning commissioner has the context for some of these earlier decisions.
I just want to state that our rooms that have 2 beds are less than the 300 square feet, but I feel like they're like 10 square feet less. And so part of me is saying, well, what are you going to do about that in that instance? Because they've already been rented successfully at 96% of our rate in those high seasons for 6 years. So I'm just throwing that out there that percentage, the 300 square feet might need to be looked at. And if it's done by inspection, then, we would gladly welcome that because the rooms are very comfortable. They're master suites and we designed them specifically for 2 beds. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that context.
Can I add something else?
I'll give you like 20 seconds, but I do want to move on to other commenters.
Important to remember too that our business is 7.5 months a year. So anytime you start hitting us with additional fees, it makes it more difficult on us to financially be viable. Also, I'm confused because I talked to Mary Hoffman about when all the hullabaloo was going on three years ago. She told me there were only 14 or 16 B&Bs in the county. And so someone said 2 weeks ago, there were 29. So I'm confused about really how many legitimate B&Bs there are in the county. Not in the city, but just in the county.
And certainly as we get deeper into this process, we will have the opportunity to map out existing B&Bs as we're looking at some of these potential ways of approaching this issue. So, so stay tuned, noted, and a great point for us to do some deeper discovery and for future conversations. So thank you very much. for your comments. Let's see here. Lisa DeReese, I see you up next.
Yes, hi, I'm Lisa DeReese, and I am the owner of the Bed and Bath on Pat Creek. I wanted to introduce myself to all of you. I think my situation is sort of unique. I've lived in Moab for 26 years now. I built my house 18 years ago, and I'm starting my 5th year with the bed and breakfast license in my neighborhood. It's been successful for me. I have 1 room. It's 2 people. Every now and then I might have 1 child that comes in, but it's very rare. I've never had any complaints. I'm only on Airbnb. Before Airbnb was filing the sales tax for us, you know, I filed my taxes appropriately and did what needed to be done. I'm just here to let you know that I exist. I do believe I feel like a service worker in this town, struggling to make my mortgage payment every month, even more so now. I went on this path with my house with 1 room so I could help maintain my house and keep it in good repair. And I haven't had any problems. And on Airbnb, I have 4.9 stars out of 5. And I think you could talk to either of my neighbors on either side of me, and they've only been very kind and understanding. So I'm coming at this as a service worker in Moab, trying to continue to live here and to continue to own my house. And I've always been above board, and I have always been legitimate. It's been very successful for me. I'm not getting rich on this, but like I said before, it's helping me keep the maintenance and repairs up on my house. I think what's next is probably a new roof. And I'm sure you probably all know they're not very cheap. So I just want you to know that I'm here to hear my voice. And however the discussions go with these covenants, I definitely want to be involved. I think, not sure everything in there is perfect. And that's that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Daly Heron, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, that's it. Hello.
Thank you.
Is this working? This is my
Yes, we
first
can hear
Zoom
you.
call. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm really excited that this topic is being brought up and that we're all being able to offer a comment. Just really quickly, I just would like to say that I think B&Bs are a really important thing for our community. I've been running a B&B for 4 years now, and I grew up in Moab. I was born and raised here, and I've seen the tourism proliferate and kind of eat our town alive. And so I also understand, you know, the want to taper this kind of an incessant growth that's happening, and this change we're seeing. And as a B&B owner, I feel like I have really been able to provide a space where I can sculpt more conscious tourism. And it's been a really powerful job for me. And I've invested everything I have into it, my education, all of my money, working many, many jobs to be able to purchase a house, to create a B&B, which was always a dream of mine. And then also to be really creative with it. So in my B&B, everything is locally made. All of the kitchenware, all the furniture, the knives, the cutting boards, the tea, the coffee, everything spotlights a local artist. And so I'm able to access the tourism that is coming to our town and show them where the community is and to give them access to the community. If you like these mugs, this is where this person sells their mugs. And if you like this coffee, you can purchase local coffee, and to direct the money back into the homes of people who love this place so that they can stay here and raise families here and be invested. And so as a B&B owner, I feel like it's much different than being in a nightly rental or a condo or a hotel. It's a really powerful thing for our community. And I would really like to see that be more opened up. And I think regulations would be really helpful. I know at my B&B, I just don't let razors. If you have a razor, you're not welcome at my house. And that's fine, because this is my house. And so I get to welcome, I get to pick and choose what I would like to have in my own business. So anyways, I would really like to see more regulations to keep our neighborhoods conscious and quiet and peaceful. And I also would like to see a path where I can sell my B&B one day. I'm investing in my life. I put my dad into retirement and I support him. And I would like to have a family, and I would like all this time and investment to be able to accrue value that I can use to continue to invest in my life in Moab. And I hope that we can continue on this path together to get out of the legal non-conforming use definition and actually have a path to be legal entities. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Jalen, before you come in, I know that Vic from the Desert Hill Bed and Breakfast spoke, but his wife, his partner, Anna, would like to make a comment. So Anna, if you'd like to come off of mute and make your comment as well, you're welcome.
I agree with Daly and Lisa and George in becoming, legitimate places. And it is a different type of person that actually goes and seeks out bed and breakfast. And they're usually a lot more respectful and quiet, which is really nice. And I like the idea of having the quiet hours from the, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., which is, that's what we do. Yeah. But overall, I would love to welcome any of the planning commission to come through our B&B and take a look at what we do. We are happy to invite you in and show you. And I believe probably the other B&Bs would do the same. So you kind of know more about who we are.
Yeah, don't generalize this with the
Nightly rentals.
nightly rentals. We're a complete different entity. It's like a motel that from the 50s or 60s that is still alive compared to a Best Western. It's a whole different ball game. We're like, they're just commercial properties that just want to get the green and just keep making money. And the motel is just trying to stay alive and do their own thing and appeal to a certain type of people. And that's who we are. We just appeal to a different kind of people.
Thank you for your comments. And I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just trying to keep even for people who show up together to make comments to kind of limit time equitably. So, and I'm sorry, did you have anything else to say, or did you feel like that summarized your comments?
I would love to welcome you to B&B and show you. We'd love to show you what we do and what we're about.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments. Jalen, did you still want to come off of mute and read that letter, or was there somebody else? Did that person join the meeting? I can't remember who it was from. I'm sorry.
I don't see that person at the meeting. It's from Tammy Jackson of Moab Bed and Bagels. And I would appreciate reading it for her. It'll be under 2 minutes, I imagine. It's one page. She says, my name is Tammy Jackson. I want to give you a short introduction to my experience in the hospitality business so that you might understand. I have an extensive background in nightly rentals, and I'm not just someone out to make a quick dollar. I started working for motels in town when I was a teenager, all the way through my adult life. I have opened 4 motels for others in this town, alongside working at Head Start and foster parenting. It took me many years of working 2 to 3 jobs before I was able to open my B&B on Old City Park Road. This is my 6th year. I have only 3 rooms, and as far as I know, we have not affected our neighborhood any more, if not less, than we did when we were foster parents, where we had 1 to 12 children in our home at a time, which would have put 12 parents and caseworkers and children on this road daily and never had one complaint. To our knowledge, we've not had any complaints on our B&B, nor have any of the other B&Bs in our neighborhood. Not only that, but as I work hard in keeping in compliance on all fronts, making sure the tax burdens are paid, creating inviting accommodations for our guests, making the Moab experience the best it can be. My neighbors across the street move in, start renting their rooms out under the radar, move in an old yellow school bus, and set it up as a residence illegally, nightly rental, and code enforcement deemed it fine because they said they were not living in it. So the question you should ask yourselves is, can you in good conscience shut me down while others who have complete disregard for the laws in their community and their neighbor prosper? I find it sad that by following all rules and working hard day in and day out, my husband still has to hold a full-time job so that at some point, possibly in the faraway future, we may retire. We are not the money-hungry nightly rental ogres. We are the backbone of the community. And what you may not realize is the truth of spending most of your life working in the hospitality business leaves you with no retirement. So our retirement plan is our B&B. We've served this community and we've done so with an American dream, working, hoping, and planning it into reality. And now that it's finally come to fruition, it's hard for me to believe you're trying to take this right away from us. We've built this business up on land that has been in our family for 2 generations, and we plan to leave it to the next generation. Moab is not just a place we live and work in. This is our home. I'm imploring you to leave the legal and tax-paying B&Bs alone. I was in compliance when I got my license. It was the public officials that threw me into non-compliance. And I do have to say, reading this and reading other comments that have come through email and hearing some of the comments, I'm not quite sure where the notion came from that we were trying to take the B&Bs away, but I guess that's out there, so it should be addressed. And I just want to say we have probably a third. If the number of 29 legally operating B&Bs in our unincorporated Grand County is true, we have about a third of those owners represented here on this call and with this letter. And I think that's very impressive. So thank you all for coming. And I did not organize this. It was not my doing. Even though I am a B&B owner, I am so proud of them.
Jalen, do you mind just reading the last line of the letter again so we know where the letter ended and your comments began?
It said, I am imploring you to leave the legal tax-paying B&Bs alone. I was in compliance when I bought my license. It was the public officials that threw me out into non-compliance. Tammy Jones, Moab Bed and Bagels.
Thank you. That was, I missed that turn, so I wasn't sure where that ended. And I do wonder, this language of non-conforming use, I think might potentially be confusing with non-compliance. So we'll come back around to that. I think we might have an opportunity to have the county attorney with us later in this conversation. So that's something that we'll also bring up, is sort of just defining that so it's on the record for everybody so they understand that difference. Thank you, Jalen. Matthew Guyman, I see that you'd like to make a comment as well.
Yes, I would.
Go ahead.
Well, my name is Matthew Guyman. I'm 3rd generation, born and raised here in Moab. And we started our bed and breakfast, we're on Old City Park too. And we had the idea to be low impact in the beginning. We have, complete off-street parking, guests have their own spaces. And, for almost a whole year, our neighbors didn't even know we had a bed and breakfast. We tried to be real quiet. We host single groups, so it's not a big house with, a ton of rooms and a ton of people. And we have really strict rules that we, require of our guests so that they, have respect for the neighbors in the neighborhood and, our low impact as well. We'd like eventually to leave our B&B to our son, and he's only 2 years old. So eventually, we'd like to continue to make this our income for the rest of our lives, in theory. And, we've poured lots of money, savings, and already retirements into this business to make it right and safe and, good for people. And, that way, with the yard and house and that, this is what we do. And this is what we want to continue to do. It's what we enjoy. We love meeting people that come to Moab that want the experience of a bed and breakfast, traditional bed and breakfast, where we serve them breakfast. We live on site. We're available for them. We give them tips and good ideas to help survive and be safe in the desert. Having grown up here, I get all sorts of questions, and I know quite a bit about how to be safe in the environment and out in the desert, and as well as in neighborhoods and in town. And we like those guests. They come here and they enjoy it. They have the experience in a rural area with dark skies. They don't want to have the noise and the crowds and, you know, be in town. And it's really great. You get to meet people from all over the world that come and enjoy Moab, and they want that sort of experience. And a lot of, you know, traditional bed and breakfast in Moab have been here for many, many years. And having those people that want that experience come to Moab, I think, is very beneficial to the community. It's not just the same people that want a simple hotel and a restaurant and that. We have certain sort of experiences that these traditional bed and breakfast, few in my neighborhood, offer for these guests. And we think it's really important that we have that availability. And, you know, we think it's also important that if something happens, you know, being able to sell our business is like any other business. Construction businesses, retail shops, restaurant owners, they all have the ability to sell their business if they choose, if they need to. And I feel like it's important that bed and breakfast have that opportunity as well. Just are treated like every other business, and it's non-discriminatory on, you know, that option as a business owner. You know, I think most of the B&Bs plan on being here for a while. They want to. They're folks that love Moab and enjoy it. But having that option available, I think, is, you know, fair for the future for bed and breakfast owners. You know, and just want to thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it, and, you know, hope moving forward that, you know, this all can get resolved in a, you know, good manner for all the businesses, so we're all happy.
Thank you very much for your comments. That is everybody that I see in the chat. If you are on the phone and unable to post in the chat that you'd like to make a comment, I'll invite you to come off of mute now. Or if you'd like to make a comment and haven't yet and you'd like to post in the chat, you can just go ahead and come off mute, say hello. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move on. All right, well, thank you to everybody who showed up with their time to make comments on this. And I just want to mention again, we will, if there's additional interest, you know, given that it's already 4:37, if there's additional interest in making a comment, if you are on YouTube, for example, and are unable to join at the moment, when you can join, just pop into the chat and say you'd like to make a comment, and we will come back around to that. And this is certainly not your last opportunity to make a comment at one of these meetings on this topic. Okay, so we will go ahead and move on in our agenda. We don't have any legislative items or administrative items, but still, if there's anybody on the Planning Commission who'd like to share any ex parte communications or disclosures, just for the sake of transparency, you're welcome to do so now. Okay, let's move on to approving meeting minutes from October 12th. I did go back and watch the YouTube. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Madam Chair, but I'm on. I only have a few minutes. So
oh, good.
I'm here on B&B stuff. Do you guys want to ask any questions?
Yes, let's move this up.
If Mila shared my email with you guys, or we can just go through my initial thoughts.
No, not yet. I was hoping that we could get to it during the discussion. And then I also wanted to add that Orion is here from the health department in a similar capacity to Christina to add some of those staff comments.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Christina, for joining us. I have a few questions that I would just love for you to give some clarification on, if you don't mind, right at the top. First of all, I know that there's been some confusion about what non-conforming uses mean. I was hoping maybe you could sort of define what that is generally, legally speaking, and then just what it means for current business owners who might be interested in selling their business, and just give a little bit of a legal background there.
Yeah, briefly, it is a legal term. It has a long history under law. And so a lot of questions that people have actually can be answered by the law. A lot of that is case law, not statute, but that's just as important and binding on all of us. A non-conforming use must have been a legal use at the time the code changed. So as long as a legal and permitted use at the time the code changed, you are vested, all of your rights are vested in that approval. It doesn't go away because you sell your business, and you still have interest in your business license and the renewal through the county, just like any conforming use would. So, you know, the county does have power to condition business licenses. Generally in Grand County, you haven't seen us exercise a lot of that power, but it's there whether you're a conforming use or non-conforming use. So that piece doesn't change at all. Non-conforming uses, though, are limited in what you can do moving forward because they're no longer permitted uses under code. And so there are some restrictions on expansions. You can't expand. You can remodel, but you can't expand space or square footage. The way we've licensed B&Bs in this county is very general. And we'll need to talk about that, but it actually, you know, if we wanted to make our B&B business licensing process more specific, and we knew the number of units that each structure had, the amount of square footage that was devoted to the B&B versus purely residential uses, folks could expand their residential uses outside of, you know, the commercial piece of it, the non-conforming piece of it. But we don't, that's not how we've regulated business licenses in the past. So that's a little tricky.
That's to say it's a data collection issue on that particular point, or it's something we would have to make a change at the code level?
I think so business licenses are, our business license power is delegated us by statute. And then we have to create a business licensing program by ordinance. So it's in our general codified ordinances. It's not in the land use code, but I do think we would need to firm up what that process looks like generally. But there is another model out of the town of Castle Valley, has the Castle Valley Inn. And they've dealt with the non-conforming uses and all of these concerns about owners relating to the security of their rights. They've put that into a zoning contract with the B&B owner. It's recorded. And so they've gone through a process to record all the things, how big the kitchen is, how many units it is, how the deck fits in, what they can expand. It's very detailed. It would be a massive effort on the county's side to do that. And I wouldn't recommend we do it by right. I think it would have to be a request by the owner that we go through a process. It's a process they'd have to pay us to go through, but we could do that. And we could assess where they are at their B&B and, you know, record a document that does something similar. And if we want, and we have time, I can actually bring up the Castle Valley zoning contract. It is recorded. It is a public document. But I think we need to decide whether the legal request that I got went through a few different options and asked for recommendations. And I think off the top, you have to decide, the Planning Commission needs to decide whether we want to allow more B&Bs. If we do not want to allow more B&Bs, which is my understanding of the public process we went through when we removed them, then the non-conforming use process we have is fine. People do have all the answers are already decided under law. They're all decided. And so I think there's enough information and legal clarity out there as to non-conforming uses if we do not want to allow more B&Bs. If we want to allow more B&Bs, then I think you create a new B&B overlay. But do not do that unless you want to allow more B&Bs, because that is going to provide an avenue to rezone, and you're going to have to go through all the process, and the commission's going to have to consider all those rezone requests, which we will get, and why go through all that? So I think first y'all need to decide what you want to do. If the answer is no, you know, then we can consider this Castle Valley model further as an option to offer to folks, and or consider revising in some way our business licensing program.
So just to clarify before we move on, I know you answered this, but I just want to make sure it's very clear to anybody listening that there is precedent, even if it's through past examples of case law versus things that are currently on our record, there's precedent that with a non-conforming use, we might be able to find a solution that allows for existing business license holders with a current non-conforming use B&B to possibly expand their residential space, possibly up to whatever limit is decided between the county and the landowner to expand their units available. sell their
No.
business. So there would be no expanses of units. So there's a
No.
fixed limit there. Okay, that's a really good clarification. All right, I'm sure there's lots of questions from other people on the commission. I have additional questions, but I will shut my mouth and leave time for others to chime in if anyone has any other.
Christina, I think that you did say, let's say that I'm an owner of a B&B and I sell my property. Can the new owner can go ahead and run a B&B as long as that license, yeah. So
Has not lapsed. Yeah. And all they need to do is show the business license of the year prior. That shows you it hasn't lapsed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chrissy, I understand that the way that the county taxes B&Bs is 50% commercial and 50% residential. So if someone had a house that had one room that they rented out, but they had 3 or 4 bedrooms in their entire house, would that give them an option to petition the assessor's office to assess the commercial part of their property at a lower percentage because of the size of the commercial part of the operation?
They could make that argument, but the only time I've ever seen an appeal work is when you have an appraisal that shows that you have a private appraisal that shows your appraised value is less than the county's appraised value. So I don't think that will be enough. Those do go to an independent hearing officer. I have been involved in a few of them, and I've never seen a successful appeal without an appraisal that values the property lower than how we've done it.
Can I just get a clarification? Because one of the things that we were talking about potentially was using a like limited licensing system, as in, you know, we have, so we did have 29 B&Bs. That was the number, I think, back in 2017. We currently have 25 that have current licenses in the county. Let's say we had that be the number of B&B licenses that were allowed in the county. Would that mean, you know, and then those could be moved between properties, et cetera? What would be the mechanism for letting that happen?
That's interesting. Then I think we would need to create an overlay of sorts. We would need it to be a permitted use, most likely, and we would use a permit capping system. And I don't know what that looks like. I think it would take us a bit of time to really work that out. I will say that is right now, I think the most popular way to address the ATV rental companies. So it's not unlike this, is that the plan, and again, we're just at the very beginning of that. So this may very much morph. And I'm speaking from my understanding of the comments as interpreted, but we haven't had a lot of public process on it yet, is that we are going to, cap the ATV rental and tour guiding permits where they are now. That becomes an asset of those businesses that they can sell. And how exactly we do that, I haven't wrapped my head around that yet, but it could be done similarly here.
You mentioned, and I don't want to get too out into the weeds of hypotheticals, but you did mention that an overlay with that approach could work. I'm wondering if it's possible to tie a conditional use to an existing business permit, whether that's applied as an overlay, where the overlay would cease to exist should the business permit lapse for that property, or if it would make sense, in the same measure to do that as a conditional use in existing base zones. Can you tie that sort of land use to a business permit if it's regulated by the county and there's some cap?
No, that's a good point. That's pretty awkward to have, the zoning mechanism that works separate from a business license. So, yeah, I mean, you point out a good point, and those are all things we'd have to work through a public process on. I don't know.
Well, it seems like that's kind of a moot point. Most people are concerned about reselling their existing business, not being able to transfer it to a new property, right?
Right. And why don't, and that really shouldn't be a concern. And I'm not seeing, I've been involved in a few of these sales at different levels, and I just haven't seen any sort of market concern about the sales, but I'm going to share my screen if I can and show you guys, and I got to leave in about 5 minutes, but let's see if this works, and I'll show you this Castle Valley document. Okay, amended and restate zoning compliance contract. This is an amendment of an earlier one they did. This is recorded against the Castle Valley B&B, which is the only B&B in Castle Valley. This goes through the whole history of how it was built, where it's built, when the history of land use regulation in the town, all of that stuff. It is confirmation that it's a non-conforming use. It talks about, here are the improvements we've agreed you can do and why. And it goes through sort of, what's residential and what's not. It gets very detailed. It gets into, here's this deck. You can expand by no more than 104 square feet. It goes through, hey, you understand you got to operate with this stuff in mind. And I think we could still do that in agreement, although the business license should be, cross-referenced in this kind of stuff as well. Goes through some definitions. It talks through parking. Sorry, I'm not sure why it's so.
On the parking piece, actually, let me ask a question that's been on my mind. I know that one of the folks who made a public comment said that they don't allow razors. And when this issue was going on 3 years ago and just sort of continuing on to today, the biggest issue I hear from the public is around noise, right? I don't know that somebody having a private license to operate a business in my neighborhood means I should suffer the externality, the cost of that noise. So maybe it's parking and there's a way to manage it that way. Is there any way for the county to require that to be in compliance, B&Bs must not allow razors or RVs or similar type of vehicles to be used by their guests or parked on site?
Well, so in terms of a business license, yes, a business license is it's at the county's pleasure, essentially. It is a privilege. It is something we can condition and regulate, absolutely. So yes, for sure. I do think we want to build that in formally to the business licensing process. But I have to say, I think that's a great idea. And absolutely, there's this tension, right, between commercial and residential uses. And I think you nailed it with ATVs and RVs. Those are the two complaints my office gets a lot of. We'd have to look at how we do that upon a renewal, especially where there have been complaints and all that stuff. So I'm conditioning my response, but in theory, yes, we can do that. It talks about, yeah. And then this agreement talks about, hey, here's how you're going to convert to use. This is, abandonment essentially is a Section 9. Section 10 is interesting. It goes through sort of what they can do operationally. Hey, you can't be renting out equipment. This is where we could limit ATVs and RVs. It talks about noise here, outside noise. It talks about how meals are provided. It talks about lighting, solid waste. Goes through all that stuff, and then you get your legalese. And then the exhibits, which I don't have on this version actually, but it actually has the exhibits that are recorded have the layout. It has sort of, the layout as existing, the layout where there can be expansions. So, if I'm not convinced that the law doesn't provide B&B owners all the assurances they need. I think it does. So I'm certainly not volunteering to go through this, massive process to make an agreement like this for every business. But I do think it's worth us considering, and it could be a process and an application where there'd be a fee associated, because it would affect the planning department and be a fair amount of work for them. it would affect the building department who would have to go out there and help us do these inspections and record all this stuff. It would obviously take a good bit of time out of my office as well. Mostly developing the form, but also I'd need to review every single one of these before it's recorded. So, you know, it's something we could offer as an option to folks. And then some people would probably choose to do it and some people would choose not to.
I know you said you have to go. I hope you'll be able to come back and join us for a future call. And Bob, I see you want to say something. So just before I turn you over for sort of last call, last word, commissioners, and I think to the public as well, who had public comment with these sorts of questions, if you wanted to submit them to the planning department for a future meeting for public comment, maybe Christina, we can put that together and send it to you so you have a chance to digest it and maybe ask you to come back in a couple meetings down the way and answer any additional questions that come up. Okay.
And I just wanted to say, I mean, to Christina's point about Castle Valley, I'm on the town council there, and it is the case that that's really what I'd consider our only real business in the town. We have, of course, business licenses for people who are massage therapists or work out of their house. But it is pretty extensive if you had several of these to do.
Yeah. Okay, great, guys. Thank you. And I'm sure this will be a very extended conversation.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina.
Now, but since we're here on this open conversation, I know, Mila, did you say Orion is on as well? I think it makes sense to just sort of consolidate these. Garish.
Oh, I think I was probably going to ask you if Ryan has time constraints too, because I do have a question for him. So that was a great segue.
So let's go ahead and let's pull that up. I know we're slightly off. We'll put our meetings back. Robert's rules be darned, I guess, for this call. But Orion, if you want to.
Sure.
There you are. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Did you want to start with anything and then we'll let Garish kick off questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the Planning Commission kind of aware of the health department regulations when it comes to bed and breakfasts. So essentially, bed and breakfasts are exempted from food code so long as they are renting no more than 6 rooms and not serving more than 18 guests. And so it would be appropriate for whatever comes out of all of these changes for health codes to be in alignment, or for the county rules to be in alignment with what health codes already say. I also, through the health department, we have a local regulation for lodging facilities. And with that, there is also no fee associated with bed and breakfasts, and they're essentially exempted from lodging permits through the Southeast Utah Health Department, so long as it's no more than 6 rooms. That being said, if a bed and breakfast were to want to exceed those 6 rooms, it doesn't mean that they couldn't do it. It just means essentially that they would have to have a commercial kitchen for their food service end of things.
Is that the lesser of the two? So 6 room, like, so could you know, if they had 18 guests and 5 rooms, it would still
apply. Okay. They still would be exempted.
And that's rented rooms, right? Not residential.
Yeah, yes. Those are specifically guest rooms. So it would not apply to their children or their own personal rooms. So any other questions? That's really all that I had to say. I just wanted to make sure that I was here to answer a few questions.
Garish?
Yeah, so Ryan, it's too bad we didn't get you involved or the health department involved when we were drafting some proposed ordinance language a few years ago, because we proposed a requirement that there be an annual health inspection done by the health department, and that would be binding your organization to do something that you would, for most of the B&Bs that we have in the county, would be exempted from inspection. So we'd have a disconnect there. But if we continued along the same path as we were going before and loosened up the numbers of B&Bs that could be allowed in the county and allowed for a conversion or new B&Bs to be legal conforming uses rather than non-conforming uses, if we put a requirement that the health department would do an annual inspection or an inspection on some frequency, that would be contrary to the health department's rules. Do you have would you have the capacity to even do something like that if the county required it by ordinance?
To be honest, I really don't think that it's necessary to have an annual health inspection. That being said, I do think that it would be appropriate to have the annual fire inspection. And I work closely and I work closely with our fire department so that, you know, they kind of have an idea of some of the things that we look for. But having the fire department in to check that GFI protected outlets and carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors and that sort of thing is something that I do think would be appropriate. But for health inspection end of it, I mean, to be honest, we would know if there was a health issue going on in a bed and breakfast because the guests would tell us. I mean, anytime there's a bed bug issue in town, we know. So.
Orion, I have a quick follow-up to that, which is for current B&Bs under all of that, is there required to be someone with a food handler's permit on site?
It's technically not required because they are exempt from the FDA, the adopted FDA food code. The one thing that bed and breakfasts are required to have a permit through the health department for those if they have 4 or more rooms and a hot tub. The hot tub would require monthly bacteriologic sampling as well as a permit. And so, and a few of you all get those samples done. So, and I'm glad that I found out about this meeting. I actually found out about it from Vic and Anna at Desert Hills Bed and Breakfast and felt that it would be good to help kind of inform you all of the health end of things.
Just a quick question, because I know that issues of county resources and the straining of those resources has come up this year, especially. As you think about your department, is there any risk to strain on your department if we were to require some of these inspections? Do you have any concerns just as far as your ability to fulfill those requirements without additional staff from, let's just say, existing numbers of less than 30 B&Bs in the county?
We probably could do it, but we probably would. But if we don't feel like, if we're not seeing issues, I don't see the reason why we would need to do that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If there's not, by now I'd know if there was a problem. And I don't see that there is a problem unless we get some other, I mean, so obviously we don't have a problem with this group of people. I didn't know that we had a full 25. I assumed we had 7 or 8, and that's because I knew about them for their hot tubs.
And I assume we record the hot tubs with the business license?
No, I have no idea. We just generally find out about hot tubs and stuff through building permits. Or, you know, just looking at how they advertise. So.
All right. Any other questions for Orion? All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate you coming on your time. And I hope that as this proceeds, we can keep you in the loop. And if you do think it's necessary to join us again to set some additional context, that would be wonderful.
I think it'd be good to be somewhat involved in knowing what's being drafted to help make sure that things are not conflicting and are in alignment.
Wonderful. And Bob, did I see that you had a question?
No, I was just saying bye to Orion. Thank you very much.
So there, Bob, and everybody else.
Thank you, Orion.
Yeah, any questions or anything, just give me a call.
Wonderful.
Her name in.
Now, before we move on to our discussion, which what I'm going to do is I want to invite Elaine from the Travel Council is listening in. I don't know that she has any comments to make. We did invite her to join us for a discussion under future considerations related to her work in economic development and how that relates to our work. But I did want to invite her, or if any of you had any questions or comments, to save that time. Before we have our further discussion as a body, what I'd like to do is finish this last guest, go back to the minutes, proceed through the agenda, see if there's anyone else who wants to make a comment, and then we'll continue our conversation. But Elaine, thank you for joining us. I know you've been on the last several. Just as far as the context, both from, I'm curious, both thinking about the type of travelers that you see and speak to, or your office sees and speaks to. We've had a couple commentators speak to, we get different types of people staying at B&Bs. This is a great way to sort of share the ethic of our community, which I think was Josie's words as we were looking at the small area plan of sort of like, who are we and who do we want to be in ways they might not get at hotels. Also thinking about the economic development piece of this. And we had one person talk about the cost of homeownership in the Valley and how this can be offsetting to that, which is something that I know came up in discussion 3 years ago. Would love if you would just share a little bit of context you're hearing and seeing in your work, and then invite any commissioners to ask you any questions that they would like to gain some knowledge on.
Sure. Well, thank you for letting me have a few minutes. I really appreciate it. I'm learning a lot being on or being part of this this planning meeting. I appreciate that. I believe I said this during the last meeting that I am a proponent of properly run Airbnbs, or not Airbnbs, bed and breakfast, excuse me. I think they add a lot of value and give a point of difference to the visitor, especially the European visitors. I think they find it rather interesting to come into an area like ours, and they want to learn more. They're what I found out from traveling in the international market and working with a lot of the tour operators, that the international group is so interested in experiences and history, and the fact that we are in the West. They love the West. They want to know more about the West, the Old West. They find it intriguing because they've seen our movies and our history and books, and they probably know more about our Western history than maybe some of us do. So coming to an Airbnb, especially when you're staying with someone who's a Moabite who's lived here all their lives, knows the history, I think that adds a lot of value. I also do know that those visitors coming would not be bringing, obviously, an UTV, an ATV. So they would be coming really to enjoy the hospitality, especially if I had one lady, I heard she spoke up and said that she provides all the different mugs made in Moab, anything that's made locally. That's the kind of experience. In fact, that's the kind of experience the Travel Council would like to have, because we would like to blog about that. We would like to talk about what, if there is a point of difference that is being offered, we can do a whole blog on what the differences are between the bed and breakfast. So I think, to me, it's a valuable commodity here in our area because we have so many hotels, that it adds a point of difference for the visitor. It brings a different type of a visitor here. They're going to have breakfast at the B&B, but they're going to eat in our restaurants and use our outfitters and just enjoy and explore our community. So that's the kind of visitor, and they're probably going to stay more than one night. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for multi-nights. So that's the type of visitor that we're encouraging. So I am a proponent of them. I think we should have them. We should allow them to be here and operate because I think they just add a point of difference. I also think that for people that are putting their personal finances into this particular business, that we should not overlook that. They're not working for a big corporation. They're here, they're investing in property taxes. They're giving back to our community. So I think that's important for us to realize as well. So I fully support the B&Bs. Again, if they're run properly, and all of ours look like they've got excellent ratings. But I think it's really something that is from the economic development part of it. I think that's important too, because here you have people who are running a business. They're in their own home. They're managing the business. They're giving back to the community. They're adding to the community. So, I mean, I think it's a plus all the way around.
Does anyone have any questions for Elaine? As we go deeper into this, I think it would be very interesting, and I'm hoping this is part of a broader conversation about the relationship of planning and economic development here in the community. But I'm sure there will be additional questions and thoughts that come up that we'd love your perspective on, especially related to how other communities have diversified and dealt with the burdens of tourism, and of course also maintaining a high quality of life for residents. So I think there will be plenty of opportunity for further conversation.
And I think, yes, and I agree. And I appreciate being a part, because really economic development was given my responsibility. I took that over mid-July. So the travel and tourism for Grand County is now under economic development. So, we're working to find ways that we can diversify our economy. It is an absolute must. And I think while we have tourism going on, and we're, things are, although this has been a very strange year, and I can't wait till it's gone. We hope that my job is to work on the diversification of our economy. But when I started to approach where I wanted to take economic development, because I'm working with, just to give you a little bit of background, I'm working with GOED, the Governor's Office of Economic Development. I'm working with the Utah Alliance. I'm working with EDC Utah, which has a vast reach around the world to attract businesses to Utah. And my first thought in getting into the economic development part of this for Grand County is, I want to diversify, but I really don't know where planning and zoning is and what would be allowed and how can I expand. I want to bring businesses here, but what is the stance from planning and zoning? Where are we looking to go in the next 5 years, 10 years? And all the decisions that are being made for planning and zoning are really going to impact what happens to our area for the future, are very important. So to me, it's really critical that we are partners and we join together. I want to work together. I want to understand, I want to be your partner, understand where you want to go. I want to answer all the questions. I want to take suggestions and recommendations. But I think we have to know that we're making the right decision for diversification of our economy, making sure that we have our Grand County open to all people, no matter what their background is, if they're minorities, if they're women, no matter who it is, that we're opening arms and not closing the door with planning and zoning and only saying, well, we only want these types of individuals here. We only want these types. I think we have to think how that will impact us going forward as we try to diversify. So it's really important on the decisions. I really feel whatever planning and zoning does, those decisions are critically important for future generations and where we're going to take Grand County. So I want to be a partner. I want to work and plan along with you. I want to understand. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. If you are able to stick around when we come to future considerations, I think we might be able to tap into that a little bit more. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do just to kind of keep us on track. Let's return to our minutes. Then we have a conversation generally. So picking up B&Bs, we'll talk about environmental education centers. We'll get a check on time. You know, today is really a day of sort of alignment around some of these issues that are swirling. So let's go back to our minutes just quickly and just get that off the agenda. So these are our minutes from October 12th. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to make? Otherwise, would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we pass the minutes.
Okay, motion by Bob, seconded by Garish. All in favor? Raise your hand, say aye. Josie, Kevin, I can't hear you.
Aye.
Aye, and Brian is absent. So thank you everyone for letting us move forward there. Okay, since we are on the topic of B&Bs, Mila, I recommend we flip those 2 bullet points. Okay, so really helpful to hear these comments from partners in the county. Mila, would you provide a little bit of additional context to the draft ordinance, draft work that's in our packet starting on page 8? Specifically, just it sounds like there's some confusion about why that's in our packet. This has not been drafted by this planning commission. That was drafted by a past planning commission. And we'll go from there. I think what we'd love to get out of this today's meeting is raise any red flags or any ideas that aren't reflected in the draft work that was done before, and try and get a consensus about how we want to move forward. Is this something we want to keep moving forward on? Is there anything else we think that needs to come first that we don't necessarily want to make this a priority? And any additional clarifications that we would need to get at a more detailed level from the county attorney or other folks at the county. So Mila, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so there were some requests to kind of kick us off in this meeting with the context from conversations in the past regarding B&Bs. So that's what all of this stuff in the packet is from 2017 when the moratorium went into effect, and the work by the Planning Commission at that point. So these are just, intended to be here for the sake of discussion. We don't, obviously they are legal non-conforming uses right now, so they aren't regulated, by any of these proposed standards. Obviously new ones aren't. We, can take or leave any of this. It's really just for the sake of discussion. None of this was passed, so certainly keep that in mind. I don't have any other conversational context about this. I can dig it up in the archives if you like. I can look for old minutes from these meetings, but we can also, kind of use this as a jumping off point and, move forward with however the Planning Commission would like to think about things now. I do think if we do want to get some more specific questions together, I can see if we can get a written response from Christina that I can send around to the Planning Commission. That would be maybe something for reference for the next meeting when we hopefully have a little bit more solidity in our discussion. I think it would be good if we can, this is obviously not really urgent, so, I think we should be thoughtful, but we can potentially identify a direction as far as what you might be thinking for options, and then staff can help put together, lay out those options. We could go through those different things that Christina was talking about as far as, what are the pros and cons of leaving it as a non-conforming use, or having it as an overlay that's just kind of an open overlay with certain standards, or we had talked about a limited licensing system, so essentially that kind of hard number cap. or having the Castle Valley Inn route, which is a legal non-conforming use with an agreement, a legal agreement with the county that that has those other terms for expansion, et cetera, written in. So if you'd like, I can certainly get together with Christina and go through all of those in detail and have a summary for the next meeting. Or if we, can kind of cross any of those off the table, that's fine too. I do believe that this, in the past, what this was going to be was essentially a conditional use permit, since that was the only option available at the time. There wasn't an overnight accommodations overlay yet.
Garish? Sorry, Garish, go ahead.
Maybe I can add some context and Kevin can join in too. I don't remember if Bob was on the commission back when we worked on this. Maybe Rachel was, but so back in, I think 2016, there was a mini hotel established in a residential area in the county that didn't serve breakfast, didn't have anybody living in it. It was just rooms, and it was there was a lot of complaints about this one facility, and it was licensed as a B&B. And there was a lot of uproar in the community about the noise, smoke, number of vehicles parked on the street. It was deemed to be a nuisance, at least by neighbors. And the Planning Commission reacted by going through several hearings and lots of meetings to try to come up with a solution that would allow B&Bs to be legal conforming uses with some restrictions. And so the draft that Mila sent us is what we ended up with. And the council did not take our recommendation to pass it. They instead passed a moratorium on any new overnight accommodations, and B&Bs were tagged in with it. I can see, especially after talking to Orion today, that some of the conditions in the draft ordinance probably did make a lot of sense to at least the health department. But the main thing that people were getting at, the comments that the Planning Commission got at the time was, we want breakfast to be served, so they're a true B&B and not just a room that people rent. And they want the owner to live on site, not just have a property that's managed by a property management company someplace like a typical condo is. And then there was a concern about how far B&Bs would be allowed from each other. And there was some analysis done that looked at the existing B&Bs, how close they were to each other, and then try to make some calls as to, well, okay, in the ordinance, we would allow B&Bs to be 1,000 feet, no closer than 1,000 feet. And I think we ended up with, they could be spaced 500 feet apart if they met all the other conditions. So that's how we got to where we were in the draft ordinance that we've looked at. So I thought that was important for new commissioners to kind of understand where we were coming from. And Moab City had a problem with a B&B that was a conditional use, and they tried to deny it. And we had been advised to stay away from conditional uses because of problems with legalities in either denying them or allowing them. And at that time, B&Bs was a big thing. Now razors and noise seems to have kind of taken over people's attention. But if if we ended up with a B&B ordinance that was so lax that people in neighborhoods were being adversely affected, I think we'd be back at the same place we were in 2017.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify one thing about conditional uses real quick? I think, and I've talked with Christina about this, I think that there really isn't any issue with conditional uses, and I think that they're actually a really important tool in our code where we can be more specific for certain uses. I think that the issue is treating them as if they are legislative, which they are not. So, you know, if we accept the fact that conditional uses are only conditioned on meeting an extra set of standards and they are allowed uses, they are not conditional based on our, you know, sort of like legislative decisions based on the county commission's decisions. It's you know, an approved use. It's just that there are a few extra things that they need to do before they get approved. Then I think conditional uses are actually a very important tool for the planning commission and county commission to be able to regulate uses in the way that they want to. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily anything wrong or that we should move away from conditional uses in general, but I do think that we need to acknowledge that they are not, they're not optional. They're not a legislative decision, if that makes sense.
I have just one clarifying question for Garish. So that one mini hotel that was kind of the bad apple, they had a B&B license through the state of Utah, correct? No.
They were licensed by the county. And I don't know if there is a state license for overnight accommodations. This was not a B&B. It was a little, I think they touted that they could house 16 or 18 guests or quite a number. But they were licensed by the county.
Specifically as a B&B?
Whatever the county calls them, because they weren't serving breakfast. Right. There was no on-site owner living there. As I remember, it was just, okay, here's your license, go forth and make a lot of money, which.
But I do think they were licensed as a B&B. They weren't performing from our standpoint at the time as a B&B because they didn't have breakfast. They didn't necessarily have a person that lived there all the time who was the owner of it. But I think they were licensed as a B&B.
I think they had a business license, but whether the license was specifically said overnight accommodation, hotel, B&B, I don't know what it said, but they were licensed by the county in some fashion. And whether the county has a special license for what was called B&Bs, I don't know, Bob.
Kevin, did you have additional context?
Yeah, and first I want to apologize for being semi-absent for a lot of this meeting. I've had bad internet troubles, but they seem to be over. So I caught about
Knock
half.
on wood.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx myself. Yeah, no, I agree with most of what Garish said. I think a few years ago, there was I think a big acceleration in new B&Bs, and in certain neighborhoods they were getting quite concentrated. You know, the typical complaints we heard were neighbors felt like they were living in a campground, just different people zooming up and down the street, you know, all the time, campfires outside, blowing smoke into their yard. And, you know, there were some people who were abused. You know, the fact that we didn't really have a B&B defined in our code was being abused by some people, and they were building, you know, constructing a mini hotel with really 7 separate, you know, 7 rooms with separate entrances. I can look out my window and see it right now. But I think some of the complaints were just normal B&Bs, but just a lot of them in one neighborhood. And so I think one of the key issues that we were discussing before was, you know, how to, you know, we're trying to find one set of rules that works in a wide variety of circumstances. We have a lot of B&Bs which don't generate any complaints and are not too dense, and, you know, no one is wanting to do anything in particular about that particular place. And then other B&Bs which are causing problems. And, you know, and crafting a sort of uniform policy that does what we want to do in both those situations is pretty challenging. I think one of the big topics from 3 years ago or whatever it was just trying to cap the number at what it was now. No one wanted to put an existing B&B out of business, but people did want to stop. They wanted to keep residential neighborhoods residential. And I think ultimately what the county council decided to do was the very simple thing of doing exactly that. I think this thing about the 500-foot distance, or we also discussed 2,000 feet, was a way of preventing neighborhoods from being dominated by B&Bs. Another concern that was brought up 3 years ago, which I don't think has come up yet in this meeting, was just driving up housing costs. Houses were kind of flying off the market back then, and I think mostly from out of county buyers. And there was just a lot of anecdotal thing of people saying, hey, I can buy this house, I can set up a B&B and it'll pay for itself. And, then I can live here when I want to, or, come visit or something. And because at the time we didn't have any strict definition of what counted as a B&B, there was concern that being able to use a residential house in a semi-commercial fashion was driving up property prices for everybody. I don't think anyone did a study on that. Maybe the property prices are going up for other reasons, but I think there was just a general sentiment of wanting to separate out the sort of tourism commercial part of our valley from the residential part.
There's a general, I also remember the comments coming up that there was a general lack of longer term rentals as well. So it's not just the cost of new homes or full single family homes, but there was a perception from those who made comments about the need for long-term rentals that the entire community was suffering the cost of a small subset of people making economic gains, and that there was a potential economic incentive policy reason to limit the number, or even, again, conversation from 3 years ago, completely get rid of this use. And therefore, those who might otherwise go towards short-term rentals might be more likely to let their space for longer-term renters, which again, I don't think there was any additional study done to that. But I just, when we talk about economic accessibility of housing, it's both single-family homes, but also rental homes.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. I think that was a comment that was made quite a bit 3 years ago. And then between then and now, we've had a change in accessory dwelling ADUs. So now quite a few properties have little additional, houses that are for the most part now being used as long-term rentals. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a fear that there was competition between, if someone's got an extra room in their home, maybe it makes a better long-term rental than a B&B, and that kind of discussion was coming up.
So turning us towards what's in front of us, I would just want to go ahead and throw a thought over the fence that I don't feel comfortable with the idea of using an overlay zone in a way that is marked to these specific uses now. That feels like an overreaction given the toolbox that's available to us as planners. So I will just sort of straw man that out there. I would be very interested in having the county attorney do a little bit more exploration around the limits of conditional uses, and if that conditional use can be tied to a business license, and if there's a way to use that as a policy tool. If we were to cap the number of licenses available, and even under that, cap the number of units available, and possibly have a slightly elevated number of units above existing units, where existing business license holders may be able to, expand up until this point, similar to what we did with the HDOH. I'm not as tied to that, but I'd be curious to know if that's a tool that we can use as well to get around some of these existing concerns that are being raised. But it does seem that using business licenses as the planning tool here to both deal with existing non-conforming uses and existing business license holders, but also not create a slippery slope or precedent for expansion, seems to me in that realm of what we're hearing from the public and balancing against business owner needs. I know it's not a perfect solution for everybody, but I'll throw that out there. And please, if anyone would like to take the conversation in a different direction, what I'd love to get out of this is questions we want to ask the county attorney or any other member of the county that might be able to weigh in. specific concerns with the draft language from 2017 or ideas for things we'd like to see explored, and just sort of thoughts on where everyone sits with their own boundaries to this.
And Emily and planning commissioners, I just wanted to say I do have a map of where all the existing B&Bs are if you'd like to see it at any point.
I think it would be useful to pull it up just for context. And I think we said the number is 25 down from 29. Is that what we said earlier?
And Eli, I'd like to ask you a quick question, because I've been thinking of what you said about conditional uses. So tell me if this is a fair assessment. When you have a conditional use, it's permitted if you meet the conditions. Is that roughly right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, good.
So I had, I think maybe I didn't quite follow what you said about overlays, Emily. So I thought one of the ideas that had been on the table, actually, let me back up a minute. So it seemed like the two problems that have been presented to us in previous meetings regarding the way B&Bs are treated in the county is, one, some people were unhappy being legal non-conforming uses. And I think Christina talked a bit about that. And then the second was some people wanted to be able to expand an existing B&B, which was hard to do. I don't recall anyone really lobbying us to create a pathway for brand new B&Bs being created.
I agree with that. I raise overlay because I know from watching the recording of the last meeting that came up as a possible tool in the planner's toolbox for how to approach this, which is we currently have 3 sort of use types under this overnight accommodations overlay. And would there be appetite for creating a distinction for however this B&B use was defined and then applying it to existing uses? So you would sort of have a little bit, it seems to me like it's spot zoning. I know that's not the literal definition of it, but that's what it felt like to me. So I think you articulated the 2 issues that I have heard. The first is this nature of being a legal non-conforming use. And what I heard from the county attorney was that that's actually a quite acceptable and commonly used tool for a community to allow for existing uses to continue and be regulated and make economic gains, but also sort of reducing the likelihood of expansion of uses. Underneath that is this issue that non-conforming uses wouldn't allow for expansion. So my question for the attorney is there any way to wiggle with that to say the county is going to cap existing licenses up to a point, use them as a condition in the base zoning. So say in residential, this is a conditional use conditioned on having a business permit, and there's only X number of business permits available with Y number of units. So that formula today would be the number of units with existing licenses, and asterisk, is there a way to say that Y is actually inflated by 10 units so that existing business license holders could expand up to a point? So that's, I think, one possibility. I don't even know how feasible that is, but that's the bucket I'd love to just get more clarification from the county attorney. The other 2 issues for me are, can we regulate vehicle use type of visitors? Excuse me, to limit RVs and razors by visitors in residential areas. And also, is there a way to limit, and this, I'm going to leave that last one on the table because I don't think that's as important. So did that answer your question, Kevin? I see you, Garish. Sorry, I just want to make sure that Kevin, that clarifies his thoughts.
I guess one of my questions is, one option that's being discussed is we treat B&Bs in a way that's similar to the way we treat all other overnight accommodations, which is there's no expansion without a vote from the county commission, but existing ones are conforming uses because of an overlay zone, which we can think of as spot zoning if we want. But then going along with that would be some kind of stricter definition for what counts as a B&B, but that this will be an option. Like if an existing B&B owner right now doesn't want to make any changes at all, that's fine. But if they wanted to switch from being legal non-conforming to legal conforming, if they think there's an advantage in that, then they would have to fit in the new rules. So it's not, that plan wouldn't put any additional burdens on existing B&B owners, but it would give them a separate pathway if, for example, they wanted to expand.
If
The
we
same way
could,
that existing hotel owners can expand if they, ask for permission to do it, or potentially.
if we made, if we were able to, instead of having these be non-conforming uses, if we were able to make these conforming uses as conditional uses in their existing underlying base zone in residential in the county, conditioned on having an active business license, and we capped the number of business licenses to the number of total business licenses, and also regulated the number of units across those licenses and had a slight inflation above existing units, would that just at first pass satisfy your mind, or do you feel like an overlay? Because I just think if we can solve this without adding an overlay to me seems to give it a degree of, you have the overlay, let's say the business goes out of conforming use, and then some future county commission says, well, there's an overlay there, and I guess maybe we do want to expand the number of business licenses. It's a way of perpetuating these uses beyond existing uses, where it doesn't sound like expansion to additional licenses is something that there is public appetite for. So I guess does that clarify my thinking? I don't know how valid that is. I'd like further legal review, but does that clarify the
You're
thinking?
saying that one possible unintended consequence of using an overlay is it would, even if the B&B ceased to exist, the overlay would still be there, and that would be enough.
It just feels sloppy. The reason we've used overlays in other areas is because, with the exception of hotels, they tend to be clustered near to each other, or larger developments that have a large enough footprint to sort of justify being a unique thing inside of the county. But to put an overlay on a half-acre parcel somewhere because a B&B is there now, it seems like it could have unintentional consequences that we might not be in a position to comprehend. But if we can do it without being sloppy, it feels like we should.
Okay, thanks. I understand your point now.
Okay, so I'm not trying to lobby my point. I'm just trying to make it clarified. Garish, I know you have a comment. Mila, did you want to is there anything specific to that you wanted to jump in on?
I was
okay,
just
then Garish will go next.
I just wanted to remind the commissioners that we did apply the overlay to existing campgrounds, and some of them were not well clustered.
Yes, my point being that they are larger units and so exist of sort of multiple acres versus you're running down a cul-de-sac and then one house in a cul-de-sac of 6 has this. It just feels, to me, it feels different. Sorry, but thank you, Mila. Go ahead, Garish.
So I'd like to pull back just a little bit, and I'm reflecting on the comments that Elaine made as far as economic diversity. The last thing Moab needs is more tourists if we want to actually diversify our economy. So, I mean, I appreciate the B&B owners that have participated in our discussion today, and I know that they probably run really top-notch businesses, and I recognize that I've stayed in B&Bs myself, and they for the most part been very pleasant. I've also stayed in Airbnbs where I never saw a soul other than the people that were there with me. But if you pull back and you think about economic diversity, I think we're kind of missing the boat here. More tourists, or a different kind of tourist, or a tourist from a different country doesn't diversify our economy any. So I just wanted to say that, get it out, that if we're trying to diversify, we should maybe look at ways of enticing other businesses besides the tourist industry into our town, into our community. Just to add to that, real quickly, Josie, I think we are trying to find a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, except for maybe the Horowitz situation where they are stuck with one room that they can rent when they used to rent 4 or 5. That's a different situation.
And Josie, before you take on, I think that is a question that we need to ask as a body, which is this a priority to continue to move this down, or is this something that we want to table and take up later on? And, 25 particular uses in our county, saying that they'd like us to look at is a reason for us to consider it. But as a body, we can make we can just choose not to take it up right now and keep it on the list of priorities to revisit. We can ask for further direction from the county commission. So just keep that in mind. Josie, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm zooming out that Garish is doing, because that's kind of where my brain is going too, of like, okay, me as a visitor in other places, I really love, B&Bs. I love Airbnb rooms in other people's homes, and I like hostels, all for the reasons that a lot of people have mentioned, which is it gives people the sense that people live in this community and they actually interact with them. And I think with the way our tourism is heading right now, is it does seem like a lot of the tourism machine sort of discounts that there are actually people who live here. If I had my druthers, so many of the overnight rentals that have already been allowed in this county would be B&Bs instead of other types of overnight rentals. I don't know how that switch could be made, because I think that a big question here is whether we want more B&Bs, but that's a bigger question of whether we want more beds, period. And I think that that's a hard question because we're feeling pretty maxed out.
Did we lose her? Okay. Hopefully she can rejoin and pick up her comments. Bob and Rachel, I know, I don't know if you want to chime in.
I have probably a question for Mila now. So I guess it's two questions. In Mark's particular case, but any case where somebody wanted to expand. If we talked about this last time, if we had criteria that made it so you could come to be a conforming use, we can do that. That might be the criteria we're working on now. If you were a conforming use, then this is the real question, then you could ask to have more units, I think. And then if you ask to have more units as a conforming use, how legislative is that request? Or does it then become sort of permitted?
So the commissioners, both planning and county, have the option to define that, the answer to your question. Essentially, if we ended up deciding for it to be this potential licensing possibility, which, may or may not include an overlay. This is one of the questions for Christina that she said she needs to research a little more. That would be the option to have essentially conditions attached to any permit. So, a current business license, or, at renewal, or, whenever it is that it's determined that would happen, that would be the time that those conditions would need to be met. And if the commissioners decided that was, you are allowed to have up to 4 rooms or up to 5 rooms or something like that, then that business would be able to do that. The legislative aspect, if the commissioners decided to make it an overlay, then similar to the overnight accommodations overlay, you could, have that be a legislative decision and have the application be, whatever it is that was deemed to be appropriate, with the guidelines and the same kind of legislative guidelines that we have for the OAO, we could determine for B&Bs separately or in conjunction with the OAO. It could just be a separate section dealing with bed and breakfasts as part of the existing overlay, or it could be, a separate overlay entirely. So that is largely up to the direction that the commissioners want to go, how legislative that would be.
So if I've got it, if we just wanted to make it, if we wanted to set certain conditions for a bed and breakfast, any bed and breakfast that wanted to apply for it to become a non-conforming use. We then could, of course, attach to that you can't have more than 5 guests. And that would be sort of the end of it if they met the conditions of, serving breakfast, having the owner on at the place, then they could get up to 4 rooms. Is that okay?
Essentially, yeah, it would be like a conditional use in that case. It wouldn't be, that wouldn't specifically be it, like Christina was saying, we would need to figure out, what exactly the interplay is between the business license and the use for the property. But, assuming that we would be able to do that, then yes, the license would include these set of standards, and there would be, potentially a certain number of licenses in the county, and, that would be it. And then, of course, the third option that Christina had mentioned was, the Castle Valley Inn option, which is that each B&B could apply individually and, pay a county fee to put together an agreement that was very specific to that property and that would need to be decided on by Planning Commission and County Commission. And that would guide any further development or expansion of that business, of that property.
Josie, you're back. Did you want to pick up?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I got lost. My power went out on my computer. I think where I was heading, though, just commenting off of Garish's comment, was just within the topic of economic development and economic diversity. I think the only argument for sort of placing increased value on B&Bs in this discussion is that in the grand scheme of overnight accommodations, it really does allow for, small local entrepreneurs. I'm also, sympathetic to the idea that they are more friendly to families and especially moms running businesses, things like that. And so by no means do I think this is like the extent of the economic diversity that we can reach in this community. But I think overall, I'm just like looking at all the different scales, and I don't know if there's anything in our toolkit to, sort of limit other kinds of overnight rentals and start to encourage things like B&Bs, which take a certain kind of use that's going to happen in our county no matter what, and really start to shape them towards these more people and local friendly things. So that's zooming out bigger and bigger, but that's really just where I was headed.
Josie, you make a great point. Sorry, Rachel, do you mind if I quickly comment on that and then pass to you? So I just want to make just one point that I made back in 2017 as well, attending these meetings, that economic diversity isn't just diversity of use, but also diversity of access. And I am very on the fence about this issue, more so than I was, I think, 3 years ago, where I tended to favor exactly for the use case that you spoke of, Josie, which is for people who are otherwise gated to the ability to own homes in this valley. Not everybody wants to own a home, but especially for families, young families who keep our economy vibrant and our valley growing in a way that is family friendly, and so on. This use can allow for economic diversification in a different way, although it also comes with costs. But I think that's an interesting point. Sorry, Rachel, thank you for letting me make my point there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just, in response to Josie's comments, and and this happened last time as well. There weren't a lot of people when we were debating this years ago that were wanting new B&Bs, and I think we need to remember that this is a commercial operation in residential neighborhoods, and residents are working primarily in the tourist industry. They are interacting with tourists daily, and I think they would prefer to go home and go to bed in their neighborhood and get away from tourists for a little bit. And that's what the primary comments were from residents. And so I think we need to, I have no interest in expanding the number of B&Bs. I think that is, I think that's ridiculous personally, if I can just be honest. And so I think that, in most of the comments, except for one, it seems like most of the current B&B owners aren't interested having this opportunity available for other people. Going back to Lane Geisler's point, this is not expanding B&Bs is not expanding economic diversification either, So I just feel like that whole discussion of expansion of B&Bs is just really out of line. But I think, it's good to talk about it, right? But I also think that as legal non-conforming uses, every single point that B&B owners brought up was addressed with Chrissy Sloan, and so their rights are guaranteed even through legal non-conforming use. And so I don't really understand the point of making this something other than a legal non-conforming use. They're allowed to sell the properties, their rights are guaranteed. The expansion, I agree, maybe we need to deal with the case of Mark Horowitz. That's a real specific example. I think we could address that in the future, but I feel like all their fears were, we can be addressed with the current designation of them. So
for the sake of
And
time,
Rach,
go ahead, Bob, and then I'm gonna
respond to Rachel. I'd say exactly, I think you're exactly right. And I think you're right on people not wanting to have, flourishing of bed and breakfast. The one reason for wanting to be a legally conforming use is then you could expand and the argument I might make, though it may not be that important for us to go through all kinds of hoops to do it. If we had criteria for becoming legally conforming, sounds like many of these places could meet it. You wouldn't be saying that you could have new bed and breakfast. You'd just say you could become legally conforming and then you could expand, but there may not be many cases of that. It may not be worth us going through that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I have just a clarifying question on all of that, because I by no means am saying that I'm for expanding B&Bs at this point, but I am understanding this almost feeling that they were kind of singled out in this particular sort of decision-making that happened in the last few years. And I know we put, a broader moratorium and then overlay on overnight accommodations in general. And I'm curious what falls, because it's not B&Bs aren't the only overnight accommodations that exist in residential neighborhoods in Moab. There are a lot of overnight rentals that are in residential neighborhoods. And so I'm curious, just kind of where those lay on that spectrum, and with an overlay of people potentially applying for licenses or applying for within the overlay permits to do overnight accommodations in the future. I'm wondering just like, what is that weird spectrum of like from B&B to Airbnb within residential neighborhoods to like commercial zone B&Bs?
So for the sake of where we landed with the overnight accommodation, there isn't a distinction between B&B and Airbnb. Airbnb is just the company that allows B&B owners to list their properties. When the overnight accommodations overlay was drawn, it was drawn in such a way that existing developments that tend to existed primarily of these types of units, such as the Rim Village development in Spanish Valley, were placed under this overlay because there was a higher likelihood that existing use would have been overnight accommodations versus residential. And so there wasn't an interest in promoting overnight accommodations as an exceptional use inside of these residential areas. So all of these people that we're hearing from now are folks who currently own, and at the time that the overnight accommodation overlay was drawn and that moratorium went in, owned and operating B&B with an active conforming business license, compliant business license. But because their property was outside of these developments that tended to be entirely overnight accommodations, they were kept as non-conforming uses. There was the option at the time to add an additional overlay or draw that overnight accommodation overlay around these parcels as well. And based off of public input, the decision was made to keep that overlay slated to those developments that kind of holistically had this use. So that's a bit of the history. So there are now 25 business licenses for B&Bs operating as non-conforming uses in residential areas in Grand County. And there is no way right now for people to have additional B&Bs licensed in our county unless they are under that overnight accommodation overlay in one of those existing developments. So making these existing uses conforming uses in some way or another, whether it's another overlay or there's conditional uses in residential or whatever, in of itself, we could guard that to not allow expansion. Does that answer your question, Josie? So like, it's not like either or, and it's not even necessarily a slippery slope as long as we're intentional if we choose to go down that path.
Right. And maybe just a simple, and I could probably answer this myself by finding the documentation, but in the overnight accommodations overlay, is anything is anything eligible, I guess, within residential neighborhoods now, or is that use just exclusively commercial? So therefore, like overnight rentals that are in residential neighborhoods are just kind of grandfathered in at this point?
So distinguishing residential neighborhoods from the residential zone. So I believe, I might be wrong, I believe that there may be some there's a campground overlay. There are overnight accommodation overlays drawn on top of residential zones. But specific to these overnight accommodations, the work was done to try and keep them clustered around these existing developments, so you didn't have a residential neighborhood where you would have these things pop up. So, I think most of us probably wouldn't consider Rim Village a residential neighborhood, which is distinct in itself from the idea of a residential zone.
Right. And I'm not even thinking Rim Village here. I'm kind of thinking of the one-off units which are in a relatively residential block of houses, and it happens to be like the one overnight rental, in that zone. And I can think of a few places within the central residential corridor where that does exist.
Josie, are those within city limits or in the outside?
I can think of both some are that are in city and some that are in county.
Just to give it, I think even before the recent OAO thing, we had an overnight accommodation overlay zone for residential areas. And so short-term rentals were not allowed anywhere except in those zones, and those zones included, Rim Village and similar places. So what happened last year was that same kind of idea was transferred to commercial zones as well as residential, but nothing really changed in residential zones a year or so ago with respect to that type of overnight rental. I also wanted to throw in that I think there are a lot of people who live full-time in Rim Village and some of these other places. They're not purely, they are mixed neighborhoods, I think.
Oh, no, I understand that. I think when I hear residential neighborhood, I think that has a very distinct meaning to most people. And I think when I'm just trying to draw that why these zones were drawn the way that they were was because recognizing people are Grand County residents living full-time inside of those developments. Generally speaking, the development was trending towards that particular use. It's really quick. I want to, just for the sake of time, hit the pause button. I see us going sort of one of two paths moving forward from this meeting. Path one is we say, this is a really great conversation. There's some questions that need to be answered about some individual business owners, individual parcels. And maybe we should wait for further direction from the county commission, but this is not something we want to keep moving forward to and putting resources in, because we've already spent 2 hours today talking about it. This is going to be a huge undertaking just due to the public interest in this. And I don't know that I feel that the individual needs of a small group of property owners is enough to guide the prioritization of where this body goes. So one path is we say, really great conversation, maybe we should pick it up. Let's wait for more direction from county commission and let these individual business owners petition the county council or the county commission and the county attorney, given the things she shared. Option two is we say, this is great, we're on a roll, we want to keep this moving. These are the things we want to get out of this call and go into our next meeting so that we can keep this ball rolling. I'd really like us to just straw poll this to see where we're at before we spend any more time. If we do want to go that second direction, let's just get some bullets on paper that we can get Mila to and staff to go back to, and let's get time slated for a future meeting with more details for the public about what we're discussing and move forward. So quick straw poll. Do I see everyone? Me, Garish, Kevin, Rachel, Obi, Josie. So everyone who might want to pick this up again, but doesn't feel this should be a priority right now for this body moving forward. if you could just raise your hand. Okay, me, Kevin, Rachel, Garish.
Wait.
That's full.
What straw poll says, we don't want to take our time to even discuss it any further at this point, and not with the condition of maybe take it up again or take it up later.
Let's clump those two together. Do we want to keep this ball rolling right now, or do we want to decide at a later time? Do we want to keep this ball rolling right now? Come out of this meeting with action points. This is going to be on our next agenda. We're going to work with the county attorney. We're going to put a lot of time. Is that what we want to do? Or do we just say, you know what, this has been a really useful conversation. This might be something we take up in the future, but this is not a priority right now. So I'm asking in this first bucket, anyone who says not right now, whether that means not right now, never, or not right now, maybe sometime, who feels that this is not a priority right now, that's the straw poll. So Rachel, me, Garish, Kevin's on the fence.
No, I thought I had already raised my hand.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So that's the majority of us. So here's what I recommend. I think there are still questions we might want to get answered while it's fresh in our minds. And I recommend that anyone who has any additional questions or thoughts, whether it's for Christina or for direction from County Commission, let's get those to Mila and ask her to assemble them. And then when she has more information from the county attorney, she can report back to us. And we will decide as a body going into next year with all the things we have on our plate, how we want to pick this up and when we want to pick this up and if we want to pick this up. Really quick, Garish. So for everybody.
But that's not what we just voted on. We voted on just let it drop. Don't bother the county attorney. Let's just let things sit the way they are. That's what the straw vote was for.
All I'm saying is if you still have questions that you want to answer, feel free to pass them to Mila and we can get more if they're hot on your head. But this isn't something we're going to pick up at our next meeting. And we can decide as a body whether we want to pick this up in the future, given direction from County Commission or whatever. Does that feel comfortable with you, Garish? I know that you're saying you just want the ball to drop and that's fine, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them to Mila and she'll pass them to Christina.
If the county to pick the ball up again, I would say, okay, let's pick the ball up again. But let's not waste any more time now. Let's just let things go as they are. I hope that most of the B&B owners that participated feel more comfortable about their legal status and how they're not being threatened, and how the draft language in the ordinance that we prepared a few years ago never went anywhere other than the county council at that time looked at it. I hope that they feel comfortable that their livelihoods and their business is protected. And unless there's something else, I don't know why we're even talking about it. That's all.
You summarized that how I was going to. So everyone who joined us, thank you for your comments. I hope that it was clarifying hearing the county attorney speak, and you know that you now can go and get more information about your specific questions there if you need to. Let's then move on as a body. Everyone comfortable moving on to the next item? Okay, great. So the next thing under this overnight accommodations general question is environmental education centers. And Mila, I'll let you just give a little bit of context here. And can we just kind of state up front what we're trying to get out of this conversation so it doesn't, I'd love us not to spend another hour talking about this unless we need to get to a specific outcome. So if you could just ask what you're looking for direction-wise from the body right now, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we are hoping to be able to put guidelines in place for environmental education centers, also field research stations, and deal with them in the overnight accommodations overlay. They are, these restriction or these, they were a conditional use, and they were sort of left hanging out here. They are not, you can see number 5. Here, I will actually share my screen real quick so you can see. This is part of the packet, but so this is what's in our land use code right now, and they were pretty much just like left high and dry with the overlay. It doesn't deal with them. It does say here, primary structures can include dormitories, educational and office space, and storage buildings. The overnight accommodations overlay just deals with beds, which is not very clear as far as how that would interact with a dormitory. You know, we have certainly heard from, in the planning office, we have heard from quite a few sources that for an environmental education center to be successful, it needs to be able to house 100 people. That is not 100 rooms. They don't want that. That is a dormitory situation. It's, you know, classes of kids, you know, 20 kids and a teacher, basically, in buildings that are that kind of size for a dormitory. You know, essentially we're just looking at, you know, whether or not we want to include them in the overnight accommodations, how we want to deal with this section of code. You know, obviously number 7 also talks about the overnight accommodations aspect of it. So the Planning Commission could either recommend potentially, you know, adjusting this section of code to simply match our current overnight accommodations overlay allowances, or being a little bit more specific as far as if we can have environmental education centers and what that would entail. And this is particularly relevant to the 313-191 small area plan, in which we are recommending to have environmental ed centers and field research stations. That was something that came out as strongly desired by the community. We were hoping to have some representatives from a landscape architecture firm. Oh, I think they are here. So Dan Smith is with us today to give us a little bit of a context as far as what we are referring to when we say environmental education centers, and what I believe that this section of code is intending us to be referring to when they're talking about these types of accommodations. So if the commissioners are all right with that, I would love to let Dan just give you a little bit of a background.
Hi there, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to actually be presenting this also with Dara. Dara, can everyone hear you?
Hi, everyone.
All right, so Dara and I are from MHT and Architects in Salt Lake City, and we have an interest in these environmental learning centers for a variety of reasons. I'm actually a landscape architect and planner, and Dara is an architect and does all sorts of cool stuff in the office, like in terms of sustainability and things. But we just kind of wanted to share a little bit of information with you guys concerning kind of what an environmental learning center is, and give some kind of case study examples that we've researched. We've worked with different school districts and groups throughout Utah. You know, one that I worked on pretty recently was one with this Ophir Canyon, where Tooele has some property. It was the city of Ophir that they had to basically downgrade from a city to it's no longer a city. So in that case, what happens is all the city property gets inherited by the school district. So the school district has all this property that was, you know, up Ophir Canyon, and they're working on turning it into an environmental learning center. So, but we just wanted to share some information. You know, Mila has been talking about this and helping Moab kind of adjust some of these OAO requirements, and we've actually been working with Canyonland Field Institute as we've been kind of advising them with what their future may be. Some of you may or may not know they have some property they pretty recently acquired it in Castle Valley, and they're just trying to kind of figure out what opportunities exist there, and so we're going to just present some information just so everyone has a little bit more of a clear picture as to what these environmental learning centers are, and kind of typically what their sizes are, what some of the requirements are. So Dara is got a slide pulled up here. And this is, we'll start just off with this. We'll go quick. There's not a lot of slides here. We just kind of want to give you an idea. But this first one is Wolf Ridge Environmental Learning Center. This is in Finland, Minnesota. And you'll see that a lot of these places have really vary quite a bit in terms of kind of their capacity and their campus size, different things like that. So like, for instance, this has a campus size, a lot of land of over 2,000 acres, but you'll see that most of the campus is kind of consolidated into one area. But they, it kind of gives you a little bit of a rundown there of what some of their
Dan, I think we lost
Did we
him.
lose Dan?
And
Oh,
no, here you are. I was getting a phone call here. So anyway, can you guys all still hear me?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. It's been kind of what, some of the target audiences, they do a variety of different things in the summer and winter and they have these different schedules of visit, kind of school groups. Some come for a 3-day visit, some come for a 5-day visit. A little bit of look there as to kind of what their finances look like, but they have things like an obstacle course, canoe dock, things like that. And we'll go ahead and go to the next example there, and Derek can go ahead and talk a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, we took a look at a series of environmental learning centers that we thought were relevant in terms of their focus, kind of their mission and their context, that we thought we could sort of were good peer institutions comparing those to CFI and to the Moab and Castle Valley context. So Crow Canyon, which is down pretty close in Cortez, Colorado, we thought was a good analog because they had a really sort of large focus on their environmental context and kind of the Mesa Verde area. And so they were really focused on archaeology. And so you can see that each one of these environmental learning centers kind of has reflects their community and kind of feels really embedded in their community. So that's reflected in the architecture, the types of buildings that are built. So they have these hogans here and different cabins and kind of lodging styles for their overnight accommodations. And also kind of built in that kind of Adobe Pueblo style. And one thing about all of these that you should definitely note is, I know we've been talking about being bed and breakfast and kind of nightly rentals, but these are really kind of longer term. So some of their shortest programs are like 3 days. So that's going to be the shortest. And then they can go into summer camp kind of lengths of time that students or groups are coming to stay. They also do have a mix of audiences and kind of clientele. So adults and family kind of programs along with K through 12 programs. I know CFI focuses a lot on not only local schools, but also kind of regional schools. But there's also the opportunity to expand to college audiences and kind of research groups. So that's in the vein of what they're looking to do. And I think, that's sort of in line with what a lot of these environmental learning centers are moving towards, is kind of having a nice kind of range and diverse audience that they're working with. But you can see each one will have a little bit different kind of focus and might have, different types of buildings associated. And this is actually quite, you can see the footprint is quite small. It says 170 acres, but a lot of that is kind of wild space and used for their trails and things. So they do have a much smaller capacity. And I know that their programs are kind of
a lot smaller than some of the other groups that we'll look at.
All right. So again, this is another one here in Colorado, and you can see this one has even this is in Keystone, and it has an even smaller campus size of 23 acres, which for one of these organizations is definitely on the smaller side. But if you can see some of those kind of pretty neat amenities they have in terms of like observatories and the yurt. Anyone who's familiar with the Professor Valley Field Camp property that CFI uses currently for their work, the Canyonlands Field Institute has had been using this property for quite some time now, and they too kind of have these yurts and structures like that out there. But again, this one is a little bit smaller, only holds up to about 100 people. And in doing research on a lot of this, these type of environmental learning centers, one thing that kind of keeps coming back to the people we talk to that run them and things is you kind of need to be able to for things to kind of work, kind of the smallest size typically you're looking at is around 100 people per night. In other words, you need to be able to have enough beds, for 100 people total, chaperones, students, in order for it to really typically function the way they need to. So it's financially, kind of feasible. So,
hey, Dan, can I actually interject and ask a question on that?
Yeah.
As you're looking at these different camp sizes, and I don't know that we've had a conversation about sort of where we're sitting upper limit wise, for our community. What is that threshold to make this viable? Is it, given that these developments tend to have access to grant money and nonprofit fundraising schemes, is there a footprint where you're like, if it's below this footprint, or if you're putting in these regulations, it's just not going to fly?
Yeah, and one that the one that tends to be the number is under 100 beds. In talking to you, we'll touch on this one a little bit later here in another slide. We actually can move to the next slide if you want. Is the Teton Science School, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, and in talking to members that have I guess Jack Shea, right, Dara?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the number that, he's someone who's been in charge of that for a long time. Like, he's no longer working there, but that's in our conversations with him, he's kind of typically always come back to that number of 100 beds. That's kind of your minimum size. So I don't know if that answers your question, Emily, but that's kind of also, I think in Minnesota, was that what basically Brian heard from the group out of Minnesota, Dara? I forget.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd also add that these are, I think you mentioned it before, these are bunk style accommodations. So when you say beds, we mean actual beds, not rooms. And it kind of varies depending on the age of the kids coming and the size of the room, really. Anywhere between 4 to 8 kind of bunk beds. So I would say, 2 to 4 bunk beds accommodating 4 to 8 kids, plus a couple chaperones is sort of typical. And I'll just jump to this real quick because it kind of just gives you a little visual. So, each bunk room would accommodate 4 to 8 kids. And then we're actually planning for space for 2 adult chaperones in those bunk beds. And that's actually separate from the staff housing that's needed as well to kind of allow these types of facilities to function, but they would be quite similar in that style. Like, there would be bunk beds. So when we say beds, it's really kind of condensed in this model. So this just kind of gives you a flavor of what these types of developments look like. So this is Teton Science School. These are some of the more public spaces. These aren't necessarily the bunk beds, the bunk houses, but this would be like the dining hall and an education space. This is more along the kind of scale of what a bunk would look like. There are larger typologies out there, and I think that Wolf Ridge uses them. They're more like larger lodge style structures that accommodate, 40 to 60 in one building. But the way that we've been thinking about it for CFI and what sort of makes sense for the site is these kind of smaller structures kind of spread out and clustered on the site. And then this image just kind of gives you a sense of what an educational space or meeting space welcome center might look like.
Okay, so I'm trying to run the numbers in my head and not getting there, but somewhere less than maybe 15,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet of developed space at the very upper range is maybe sort of that ceiling.
Yeah.
Does that feel right, or would it be smaller than that?
I think that's probably about right. We're looking at some of these larger structures that accommodate the gathering space, the dining space, for those to be on the order of 5,000 to 8,000 square feet, and then the actual bunks kind of spread out to be quite small.
Yeah, 12 to 1,800 square feet.
Yeah, at the most.
At the most,
Great.
yeah.
And we'd be happy to share some of the more specific information that we're looking at with CFI, but we just wanted to kind of keep it, more general in terms of environmental learning centers, that there is kind of a broad range out there. And depending on the community and the context and the environmental kind of site that these facilities are located on kind of dictates what is developed. So I think in the context of Grand County, it's not going to be at the scale of something like Teton Science School or Wolf Ridge. Those are quite large organizations. So it's definitely a scaled back version, but I still think like what we're talking about, that 100 bed is kind of the sweet spot. And it does allow for a school group to be participating as well as potentially like an artist retreat. So there's kind of, and you were talking about diversifying your industry, or your economic outreach there. I think that there's some real opportunity to bring a wide range of people and kind of expose or allow Moab to be kind of more accessible to a wider range of people.
So looking at and planning commissioners, feel free to please jump in, but looking at this code F in our packet, currently the average density of individual accommodation units, for example, campsites and or cabins, shall be limited to 1 per 2 acres. Individual accommodations shall not exceed 400 square feet. And the county can permit a bonus density for individual accommodation units of up to 1 unit per 3/4 acre. Is that just on a kind of high level numbers? It seems low from what you're describing as what's feasible. So does that change the unit economics of how big the development would need to be overall, or what would be, as we're discussing this, would you have any expert recommendations of different thresholds we should maybe consider?
And you can chime in here too, Dan, but
yeah.
I would recommend that threshold be raised in terms of, so one of the things that we are trying to be very much aware of, and we really actually appreciate some of the language that's coming out of the OAO in terms of requiring kind of offsetting your energy with renewables and some of the gray water requirements. That's very much in line with what we've been thinking about with CFI in particular. We think that's really appropriate. But I think the other kind of goes hand in hand with that is we're trying to kind of keep the campus, so to speak, quite dense, or trying to kind of make sure that the footprint isn't spread out over the site. So we're trying to kind of create a walkable kind of campus. You can kind of see in this image here that the buildings are spaced in a way that you can visually see them, you can walk to them, that's kind of intuitive in that way. And so I would recommend looking at how, tweaking the numbers on the density portion, just to be aware of that kind of desire for these types of learning centers. And I would also think you'd want to raise some of those thresholds in terms of individual square footage requirements, just to be able to accommodate some of these building typologies like we've been talking about.
Wonderful. Other commissioners, do you have any questions?
This has been quite helpful. I'm kind of wondering where CFI's teepees are going to be placed, because I don't see them on any of these pictures. This discussion for us started when we were trying to develop a gateway. I'm sure Mila probably described this to you, but we're trying to come up with some decisions about how a gateway into Moab is going to develop. And I think we're pretty much in agreement that educational centers will be allowed there. But with your experience with working with educational centers elsewhere, is this even an issue? Is the area that we are doing our small area plan that conducive to a educational center?
Are you talking about the language right now?
I'm talking about the area that we've been spending quite a bit of time discussing. And you've seen,
abstracting from any individual development, just more broadly as we're thinking about how, if we might shape our code to this type of use, with that northern corridor driving in from the north where you hit 313 and turn off to Canyonlands, that's the area we've been looking at. So I think that's Garish's just like how, Garish, maybe you could just restate your question, but want to make sure
we have some draft language for how, what kind of controls or what kind of development would be permitted in an educational center in that area. And I wonder if, it sounds good, but I wonder if you can just plop one of these down anywhere, or do you want an amenity like, I'm familiar with Crow Canyon, and I'm familiar with the center down in Monticello. I'm just wondering if, from your perspective, is the intersection of Highway 313 and 191 north of Moab, out by Moab Giants, would somebody go there and say, oh, I want to build an educational center here rather than another place within our county?
I think it really depends on the site specifically. And I'd say if it's basically kind of at like the crossroads of both major kind of arterial roads, probably not the best place. Not to say that you couldn't, typically these environmental learning centers want to be kind of off the beaten path a little bit more than I'd say kind of like this real, like right off the side of the road. So that would be my one hesitation that way. But other than that, yeah, I mean, there are definitely in a variety of areas. And I also think, do you want to talk maybe a little bit about Dara about that number 4 that we kind of jumped over real quick.
Oh,
The,
yeah, Canyon Country Discovery
Can-
Center. We
Yeah.
actually did that project
that's one of our
a few years
projects.
ago. And one thing I wanted to point out about their facility, and you can see it is kind of right off the road here, but I think it's tucked in back in a way and kind of creates a bit of a buffer here by kind of having, you know, this kind of landscaping and parking area. It sort of just makes you feel a little bit more removed once you get tucked back there. So it is kind of similar in that way. And another thing, I would say, generally, Garish, to answer your question, there is, and for a lot of these organizations, and for CFI in particular, their focus is on experiential outdoor education. And so there's a lot of focus on being able to sort of take off right from the site and to be able to kind of go on a hike or go, you know, explore a creek or kind of go up on a bluff or, you know, be able to kind of interact with your environment. So I think it does depend on if that type of activity is sort of available. Another way you could look at it, and this is somewhat the way that we're thinking about the Castle Valley site, is that it's actually more of a base camp. And so there's lots of excursions kind of starting and ending there. It's not necessarily like you're going to do your outdoor adventure right there on the site. You're kind of, you know, packing up and going out to the river, to different points of interest from that space. So I think it really kind of depends not only on the site, but also the organization and how they're going to organize their programs.
Yeah.
So, or Mila, were you
I
just
appreciate
gonna...
that. And the reason I'm asking is that right next to a major highway with a lot of traffic noise and whatnot, doesn't sound like the type of environment that this experiential learning would happen at. But our planning area does extend all the way to the national park boundary. So if you can get away, you know, I can see the feasibility of potentially something being built away from the highway, away from the noise, where they could have those types of experiences like you're describing in Castle Valley. I just curious for your opinion on it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Thanks.
Yeah, and that was
Right.
actually going to be my question for you guys, Dan and Dara, was like speaking to thresholds around, well, it seems like the beds is that 100 seems to make sense, but around like acreage or approach to site planning and considerations with programs that are specifically on site versus programs that are more field-based or that kind of mix in between. If you could talk to that.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've done this research, and I think what we could do, and you know, maybe this is something that could be discussed at a later meeting, but I could see us being able to kind of quantify that a little bit better, knowing that that's, you know, what's interesting the Planning Commission. So I think I don't want to necessarily say this is the answer because I think it really does depend. But there is a bit of a threshold there, right? I think if you're getting, I mean, if you look at Professor Valley Field Camp, it's sitting on 40 acres, right? But they don't utilize the 40 acres. They really kind of only utilize
4 of them.
This kind of core 4 acres, right? So, but they actually, they walk around and they kind of do little excursions out and about and do different kind of activities. But I think realizing that there is kind of this kind of core of development that you do want to concentrate that in for a number of reasons, you know, access to utilities, just kind of walkability of the site and kind of safety, really. So I think there's generally a kind of core area that you want to be thinking about, but I do actually think that core area needs to be thought of as kind of densely developed, not in the urban sense, but in the sense of like providing the amenities in a walkable space. So I don't know if that answers your question, Josie, but I think it's something that we could start to quantify and give you maybe a range, knowing, just kind of looking at the different ELCs in the region and then kind of our more in-depth experience with CFI.
I'd say another thing that commonly happens is, like Dara's saying, is you kind of have like a core campus, you can kind of think of it, but then they have kind of these little outposts on the property. So they'll have a little learning center down by the creek, and then they'll have like a little, with maybe a shade structure or a little outdoor pavilion or amphitheater. And then they'll have one, maybe towards some rock formation or archaeological, artifact there that they want to, kind of do kind of specific learning and activities around. So there are these kind of little pieces that maybe extend out beyond the actual kind of core campus, but for the most part, that's the way all these examples and most of these environmental learning centers are organized is this way.
So Dan and Dara, thank you for joining us. I think where we want to just leave this conversation is just to sort of summarize some of the things we heard. And then it sounds like Mila may be allowing staff to come back with some more specific recommendations to address our existing code might be a good next step. But so some of the things that were raised were our existing density thresholds in our code really aren't conducive, not just to the general way these projects are developed, but to that goal of walkable areas and saving open space. That the size of individual buildings is something we'll want to look at, both to allow for more clustered housing through bunk type developments and also larger, more public spaces that might be amphitheaters or might be cafeterias and so on. And that thinking about, maybe the size of these developments means that blending into the environment isn't as much of an issue as far as how we define that in our code, since it is sort of a general priority of these developments anyway. But we might want to look at, are there outlying use cases that might feel odd on paper as far as the height of buildings or the footprint of buildings or things like that, that actually would make quite a lot of sense given the sort of specifics of this use. Those are the big ones that I caught. Anything else that you both would recommend? Anything else that the commission heard that we want to draw back to as far as direction from Mila and staff? Otherwise, I think asking staff to spend some time against this and come back with some recommendations sounds like probably a good next step. So any other comments from Dan and Dara? I'll let, if there's anything else you would recommend, otherwise commissioners.
No, I think those would be the big ones. I mean, also just kind of this question as to like, if, I think going through the code, we kind of saw something concerning like, for every building, there's kind of has to be 5 acres. So like if you had like a bigger, 160 acre site, then you could, basically do the math and figure you could do, 20 something small, 20 something buildings. I think that's one way to think about it, but I'd say also considering ways within that, kind of overlay or, whatever you're talking about doing in terms of the kind of the zoning of these is trying to kind of condense them. So, if somebody's not going, well, we have 160 acres. That means we can put, 25 different buildings all spread throughout this entire site. I think that would be important is to try to get some language in there that talks about kind of the density and condensing these. That would be but yeah, everything else is really accurate in terms of the things that should be probably addressed.
Yeah, I think you captured that well, Emily. And I echo what Dan said. And I think what that limit is probably closer to 2, it might be double that, 2 to 3, depending on the size of the building, and kind of in sort of the area. I think in a lot of these, we're looking at sort of tighter clusters of bunk housing, but also, that's quite different than when you kind of get into some of these more public spaces where you've got a dining hall and an education meeting space, and they might be a little bit more spread apart to kind of have outdoor gatherings as well. So I think there just needs to be a little bit of variation in that, within that language.
Yeah.
But we really do appreciate
Wonderful.
you guys having us and being able to speak to you
Yeah.
guys today.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you for joining us. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Does anyone else have any last minute questions they want to ask Dan or Dara before they drop? Otherwise, we'll extend our gratitude for them staying on with us this late.
Yeah, it's okay.
All
Thanks,
right.
you guys.
Well,
Good luck.
All right. Hey, thanks.
thank
Yeah, good luck.
you. Take
ya.
care. All right. Okay. Cool. We good to move forward? Mila, do you have what you need?
Yeah, I think so. So it sounds like I will go ahead and at least work with them to quantify some of those things that they were talking about. And I can put that together in a summary, and we'll be able to take it up again next week with a little bit more specific information, if that sounds good to everybody.
Yeah, I would love to, let us know once you have slightly more sort of specific standards that you might recommend we start with. I think if we can try and start, even if it's just with kind of a straw man version, like to build off of, that would keep these conversations a little bit more sort of operative, and I think help us. It sounds like from public comment that this is definitely a compelling use that there's public interest in. So I think we should move forward.
Great.
Garish.
Two things I heard. Well, one thing I heard was if we could draft the language to encourage or require clustering. So open space between buildings, could be beneficial for the vision, but if we could put language in about clustering, that would guarantee that a lot of the open space is actually wide open space rather than just distance between buildings, that would be helpful. And then I have a question, I guess, for Mila is why have a height limit of 35 feet, an exception for one building? I don't know that a 35-foot building would be necessary for this type of campus, but maybe you have ideas as to why 35 feet would be an exception to the other building heights. And I'm thinking the other building heights could even be lower, especially in an area where we're trying to preserve the scenic values.
We
Sorry,
didn't hear
Doc.
anything. If anyone's
Okay, good.
You're good.
I caught my mute button just in time. So 35 feet is our standard height limit for all of our zones right now. So I don't know if they were necessarily specifically recommending that it would need to be higher than that. But we hadn't settled on anything that would have to be lower yet. So I don't think that I don't see a reason that it would need to be higher necessarily than 35 feet. I think most of the bigger buildings that these kind of places are talking about are like meeting spaces and eating facilities. And, some more height really accommodates a feeling of spaciousness, but, they aren't usually contemplating like 2-story dining options or anything. So I wouldn't think that we would need to increase the height limit past 35 feet, but I can ask them for sure.
Garish, you're muted. Garish, oh, there you go.
Oh, sorry. I was questioning why would, in an area that where we're trying to emphasize the protection of scenic values, we would even go to 35 feet, why we would even allow one building to be 35 feet.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, maybe a limitation of buildings a lot less than 28 feet would be more appropriate. But it you know, if they were developing, it all depends on the impact on the scenic values. If they have a campus that's tucked behind a ridge that's far from the highway, like it probably is irrelevant or could be irrelevant.
Yeah, and so I think that's, you know, maybe more of a conversation about the smaller area plan specifics, but we do have a few of those scenic standards that deal with the kind of hiding things topographically, just like you're talking about. So I don't think that, I'll have to read through them again, but I don't think that our current standards, proposed standards, would allow for, you know, a 35-foot building that was like right there visible in the view shed. You know, we're hoping that the combination of the, you know, using the topography of the site and the ridgeline standards and the, you know, view shed analysis, that we would potentially be requiring that any building that was built up to 35 feet would be, just like you said, you know, tucked somewhere back behind, you know, a hillside or something along those lines. And actually on that note, I did, well, I'll bring it up in future considerations, but I'll talk about it in a minute, but Landmark Design, the landscape architecture and I believe other site planning firm, they actually they are working with SITLA, and they have done a topographical analysis of their land in the scenic area plan area. And they have, you know, they basically showed exactly where on their land would be developable that isn't visible from the highway. So it is a possibility that we could potentially pay them to do that study for all of the property in the scenic area, viewshed protection, and then scenic protection area. And we would then be able to have those kind of recommended developable areas on file at the county. So that's something that we could potentially talk about having kind of in our back pocket as part of our plan.
So I think let's pick this up ideally at our next meeting, if staff is able to get to some sort of pockets of benchmarks that they might recommend. And we can also maybe talk about additional exploration work for that corridor area. Granted, we know that this is something that would go in countywide, and we have this land use protection zone for that northern corridor that we are working towards. So we'll just keep that in mind. Okay, I'd like us to move on, just trying to be wary of time, that we still have some things we want to discuss. Regarding, so I'm going to move us forward to conditional uses. And what I recommend, instead of us, I mean, we don't have anything in our packet to go deep on the tables, but Mila mentioned earlier with the county attorney, just some clarification around how we might think about conditional uses. And I think let's try and give ourselves just like 10 minutes for discussion here, just as far as how to move forward. For context, there was a process started 2 years ago, year and a half ago, to start to look at our use tables with the goal of trying to weed out conditional uses where it didn't make sense, because conditional uses were sort of misunderstood and were leading to some confusion, both at, I think, the Planning Commission and also the public and developer level. Now, Mila clarified, you know, when we think about, Mila, I'm sorry, I thought it was you and not Chrissy. So I'm going to assume I'm actually speaking accurately when I say I believe you said this. You know, conditional uses don't mean it's legislative and we apply conditions, you know, of whether or not we like it or not. They're very, very specific things inside of our land use code that we say, in order to create this use inside of this underlying zone, you need to meet these conditions which go above and beyond or are different from what would be sort of the standard uses for other permitted uses in that area. So my thought on this is, instead of doing a line by line, you know, yes or no, that we commit individually to come back, you know, form one of those Google Docs where we put our ideas in, to call out any existing conditional uses where we don't understand the use and we want more clarification about what is this conditional to, or we feel that our existing standards are not clear enough or stringent enough for this particular conditional use, that we might want to look at the development standards, or just raise anything that seems problematic that we want to come back to, and then develop a plan to go through those, either by relooking at the development standards or considering potential changes to the use tables themselves. How does everybody feel about that as a next step? Good? Yeah? Okay.
And I'll just add that, one approach is that we could go through and remove things as being conditional, because it is a little bit confusing, because of, there isn't really that much choice, and just relying more heavily on the use specific standards, which, we can beef up if we want to. I think it would be probably to our detriment if we, just sort of let those go. So, I'm happy to provide another Google Doc with all of the, with the whole use table. And then it seemed like it worked pretty well for everybody last time. And then we'll put that in the packet for next meeting with all the comments. So that can be available for the public, and we can discuss any changes. Do you have any zones? Do you want to concentrate on any zones in particular, or just go through all of them?
Well, my thought actually had been to put it into bite-sized pieces. I don't know if I was thinking of any particular zones, but just so we keep our concentration, go through part of the use table, and mark it up.
What about certain categories of uses instead of certain zones? So in other words, going kind of horizontal chunks instead of vertical chunks.
Let's do that. I think that's great. Mila, do you mind in the background just pulling up the use table really quick, just so we can just kind of look at those chunks? Okay, awesome.
Hopefully you can all see that.
Yep. So we've got household living group. So residential uses, public and civic uses. That's commercial uses and more commercial uses, industrial uses.
And that's it.
And that's it. Okay.
And then other, there's other also.
Well, so my recommendation, I'd like us to have a Google Doc where we can just look at them all. So if anyone wants to really go in there and go through it, don't feel like you're blocked. But we'll concentrate on residential uses and public and civic uses and see how far we get. Because I think, household living, group living, that could be a really, really big one, but there's only this sort of limited commercial uses in there. So how does everyone feel about this? This gives us 2 weeks. Mila's going to create a spreadsheet, hopefully in the next couple days, and then we can just, spend our, we'll have columns for everyone's names where you can drop your notes, just like we had when we were looking at the small area plan, and just drop comments, notes, however you want to communicate. And please make sure to at least get through housing or residential uses and public and civic uses, let's say by the 4th, by Wednesday the 4th. And then that way, Mila, hopefully, you can just sort of summarize in our packet for public. Okay. We'll make this available obviously to the public, but just that way we have sort of a summary for those 2 areas for Thursday. So that gives us a week and a half focusing on those 2 big blocks. You can do more if you want. I'm a comprehensive kind of gal. I might go dive deep, but you do you. And then we'll come back and we'll look at those together in our next meeting. Sound good? And we'll try and keep the agenda light so we don't just pile on some of these going in. Okay. All right. I'm going to move us forward unless anyone else has any other comments. Forever hold your peace. If not, forever hold it until 2 weeks from now. Okay, cool. Use tables. Okay, so that leaves us to sort of our wrap-up items. Now, Elaine is still on. She has been attending our meetings for the last few meetings. Mila and I had a sort of general conversation with her last week. Yes, last week. Weeks that last a decade, I tell you what. It's about 2 years ago. And just to kind of just get a sense of how she's thinking about economic development, the travel council, and then just as she mentioned, looking at planning as a piece of that, right? Because how we are interpreting public comment in our recommendations to county commission will be a guiding factor to some of the levers and tools to be pulled, and then maybe some of the constraints to consider when looking at economic development and diversification. So I don't know that we want to go deep into a conversation. I'd like to limit this to, a sort of quick chat. And Alina, I appreciate your comments and you sticking around. But to the commissioners, as we're thinking about our priorities, does anything come to mind that you would like any maybe research that Elena has access to, or what she is looking at with her team related to economic diversification, or anything that we would like to bring back to her group to say, this is an area that we think there's partnership opportunities between our bodies? So, all right. Well, Elaine heard me kind of go on for an hour and a half the other day. So the big ones that came up is one, just, how we think about economic diversification. And the reason this, impacts planning is both sort of on the ground land use development, but also, every single development choice has impacts for related use, for development patterns. Do we want to see more dense sort of mixed use development? Would we rather see broader, more sort of rural type development? And that carries different weights for economic development. So if there's no comments, maybe if anything comes to mind, we can summarize back for a later call, or just ask for sort of monthly updates in print in our packet. But how does everyone feel about staying close to this moving forward? And Elaine, feel free to chime in as well if there's anything you feel you'd like to cover.
I just want to clarify one thing. I am not a proponent of more bed and breakfasts. So I don't know if I gave the wrong impression. I'm a proponent of supporting the ones that we have. And that would be where I am at the moment. So no expansion. I think our small community right now, the grouping that we have, they all seem to be such different individual offerings. So I think we're good, but I am not a proponent of more. The other thing I wanted to say is that we are, if you have not had a chance to look at some of the things that the Travel Council, which is now under Economic Development, is doing, travel and tourism. Number one, I just want to let you all know that we do not advertise UTVs. Since I have been at this office for 5 years, I have not allowed, we have not put UTVs in any type of print material. We're focused on families. We're focused on a higher demographic. We're focused on people who are active and want to come here. So we do not advertise UTVs at all. And we do have a page and a lot of information on our website to guide people who are interested in, UTV riding, because we want to make sure that they're following what the BLM has stated, everything that we're, stay on the trail. If you haven't noticed, we put up signs. I put up 2 billboards, one north of town and south of town, that talk about staying on the trail. I have focused in the last 2 years on sustainability, and I think that's a big part, and I think a very big interest for people or businesses that may be looking to come here. So we're focusing on sustainability and accessibility. We want to make sure that people who need accessibility, or they have a family member that feels like they, can't come here to visit because they've got a member of the family, a child, an adult that can't enjoy the parks, they can. So sustainability, accessibility, and the last pillar is education. If you haven't checked out, and I'm sure a lot of local people in our community have not checked out, We have been focusing on the MOAB, do it like a local. We're trying to educate the visitor before they get here. And the philosophy, my philosophy is, we like that you love it here, but love it like you live here. Treat this area with respect. We've done a lot of messaging with COVID. We're actually updating our current COVID, which happens to be our number 1 page on the website. We had 3 million visitors that go to the tourism website, which puts out a lot of information to people around the world. So, we want visitors that are going to come here, that are going to leave no trace. We're members of Leave No Trace. We expect them to stay on the trail. We've put out a lot of materials and a lot of information regarding that. So we're a completely different focus than what I think people realize. But you can look for a print ad that features a UTV and you won't find one with the Travel Council endorsement. You've got a lot of social media out there that highlights, it's just like Power Dam. We don't talk about Power Dam. We don't want to even mention that it exists, and you won't find it on any of our materials. However, with social media and people posting, it's overrun, but nothing coming from the Travel Council. So we're here, and we're of the mindset that we want to preserve and protect our community for generations to come. We want families to visit and adults to visit. So we were focused in a completely different way. We also we stopped advertising on March 17th when the health order went out. And we just did a little bit, 2 weeks in September and 2 weeks in October to the communities. And we have a lot of updates, local communities, the drive markets basically. But we're really focused on our area, and education is, how do we educate the visitor? And we've been doing such a great job that the state of Utah has taken their lead from little old Grand County about educating visitors that are coming here. So we want a quality visitor to come here. It doesn't mean that we're opening the doors and say, hey, anybody and everybody just come here. We have a new ad that talks, a new print ad that talks about, we're for families, we're for recreation, and we're for your business. So we're trying to focus on that. And I think the guidance that I can receive from the planning and zoning, the commission, to work with you to identify what types of businesses that we would love to have here and love to go out and recruit to come here. That is the direction that I'm asking for, and I'm looking for, so we can partner to make those right decisions for our future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. And I think as we go and start to look at the use tables, we are in a good spot to start to pull those together. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. All right. So Mila, future considerations, and then we'll move forward.
I'll be quick. I just have one question for the Planning Commission. So Sitla, as I mentioned earlier, has approached me with some ideas for the area, their land out by our small area plan area. And they have a few different concepts, development concepts. They've basically used our proposed standards for the scenic resource protection area and then developed a few concepts according to those. And they would appreciate any input at this stage. And they are wondering if there's any way that those concept plans could in some way be incorporated into the small area plan, or just kind of in the record. They're not planning on developing there for 10, 15, 20 years, but they do want to make sure that they are developing something that the community, at least at this point in time, would be interested in seeing, and they would love some community input, and they would love some community buy-in to their schemes, and they're open to whatever conversation or suggestions that commissioners or the public have. So my question is, how would the Planning Commission like to discuss those plans? It is, I believe, at least a 1,600 acre parcel, so it's a very large area. The plan doesn't contemplate developing that whole thing, of course, but I think it would be wise of us to at least consider what they're talking about. And, you know, we do have the opportunity to make suggestions if we'd like to. So I'm happy to, you know, they're happy to present. I have those plans. They would be happy for anybody to look at them. If you don't want to, that's also fine. But this was their request. And I do think it would be that it's great to hear that SITLA is interested in getting feedback prior to developments. As we know, that has resulted in some acrimonious exchanges in the recent past. So I would encourage the Planning Commission to possibly give some input, or the public, or however we want to work it.
I mean, it would seem to me we've had people actually present plans to the Planning Commission that weren't kind of formal to get feedback on them before they did them. I'd certainly be interested in seeing these plans. We probably have to limit the amount of time if it was a presentation, but I'd certainly be interested, and I think it would be valuable to give feedback. Unofficial, of course, but
Yes.
kind of individual feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that beyond giving feedback, just to sort of have eyes and ears on what SITLA is generally thinking in that area as we develop this plan is probably in the best interest of the community. I am curious, Mila, if you have a sense if for the SITLA parcels, no development is an option in their minds, or okay. Because
they're sort of state mandated to develop the parcels.
Yeah, and I think that is like the huge point of contention with a lot of Moab residents and Grand County residents, is just really mistrusting SITLA as sort of a juggernaut of a eventual development. So, you know, already kind of anticipating that in this process, as far as the public is concerned, I'm sure that will come up.
And there is always the potential for trading. If BLM or somebody's interested in trading, and that certainly went on in the Castle Valley area with a lot of developable land SITLA traded out for BLM elsewhere, which was probably more developable for them.
And that is part of a couple of these proposals as well, is some trading.
Is this, could it be in our next packet for us to read and review? All right, so why don't we just add it to the packet and leave time for us to comment as a group, as a body?
Would you like them to would you like them to make a short presentation of the concepts, or do you want to just look at the paper versions and discuss amongst yourselves?
Given the fact that we're already talking about going through the use tables in the next one, and I'm looking at the clock and it's 7:15 and it's going to be darker next week, 2 weeks from now, let's do our own review. I'm assuming it's nothing imminent, and we can ask them back if we need to. So
okay, great.
Okay. Awesome. Anything else for future considerations? I know we had the housing access plan in our packet. I think we should probably, if it's possible, leave that for our next one as well, unless there's anything you particularly wanted us to pay attention to right now. Okay.
The only other consideration I would say or suggest is that we will have some terms up on December 30th, 31st. So we might want to start just talking to people and thinking about what's going to happen next.
I have been sharing to my folks. I have a relatively small social media network these days, which is very nice, but I have been sharing. Please share. If you're listening and you're interested, I think December 1st is our deadline to be able to get it in front of County Commission in time. So if you want to apply.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll have dates for you soon.
Cool. Let's ask planning and zoning to put something up on the social media web, and we can share broadly, those who want to. All right. Lovely. I'm going to move us forward. We're at risk of losing our quorum. We're shedding like flies. Recent building permit review. Looks like just a few items. Page 12. Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted. There we go. Unmuted. So we have 5 new houses, 2 new manufactured houses, and 1 new solar permit. So again, and that's reflected by our planning new applications. We do not have the same surge as we did over the summer.
All right. Any questions on that? Okay. And Jaylyn, as always, is she still here or did we lose her? I think we lost her. Shoot. Okay. Well,
I have the action items or county commission update that's not Jaylyn or that's planning and zoning related. So we did pass, and this one is very relevant for planning commission. We did pass the small area plan resolution, the same as we did with the OAO, which notifies the public of the intent to modify standards for that area and places a moratorium on new projects for a maximum of 6 months. So I included that resolution in the packet. Just so you know, there was definitely interest in the county commission to, of course, get that buttoned up prior to the 6 months, but that's kind of the standard allowable moratorium. So that was what we included in the resolution. So there is a current moratorium on new development in that area.
All right.
And then the other one was the housing task force presentation. And I did just include that not as a discussion item, but as an update and this is the status of the housing situation in Moab right now. And if you are at all interested in talking with the Moab Area Housing Task Force, or if you would like them to give you the same presentation, I can invite Caitlin to a meeting, and otherwise you can just read through it. So
I think since it's available on YouTube,
not next meeting.
Probably.
But at
I'd
some
say
point, if you ever wanted to talk to them, you're welcome to.
Planning commissioners, if you have a chance to review the meeting, the Grand County Commission meeting on YouTube, and have any questions, we can address those. All right. Last thing that I will say is we've lost our calendar for the small area planning. I just want to get a quick gut check on where that sits. I know it's been in legal review. We canceled our 2 meetings last week because of lack of interest. I think we are doing a Zoom meeting on Wednesday. Yes. And if enough.
Yeah.
Where does that
I'm not sure if we want to do those now, considering that they're out of planning commission, or if we want to wait until we have our public hearing.
Since we haven't advertised it, I think waiting is fine. Let's just make sure that we are really leaning in and listening for cues from the public. And for anybody who's listening, you've made it this far, thank you. And also, if you have any comments related to the small area planning, your voice still matters. You can send letters to the planning and zoning department. You can attend our meetings and speak during citizens to be heard. So please make sure that your voice is heard in that. What is the timeline for your legal review, and when do we expect to have our next action item for that process?
We generally, unless you are Christina, cannot give a definitive timeline for legal review, but we would hope to have it within a few weeks.
Awesome.
So shortly soon.
At our next meeting, if it's possible, I think if we know more, I should say that, let's just sort of revisit timelines so everybody is aware of where things sit. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I know this was a big meeting. I feel like we got a lot done. More importantly, I feel like we got some really good direction moving forward. We're able to sort of put some things off of our plate and appreciate everyone's input. So, motion to adjourn, the 4 of us.
Motion to
Bob's always on
adjourn.
it. All right. Josie, I'm giving you the second. All right.